I used to believe that friendship was sacred, that the people closest to you were the ones who would stand by your side when the world turned against you. I was wrong. So catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. The day I discovered Vanessa's betrayal started like any other Tuesday. The autumn sun streamed through my bedroom window, casting a golden glow across the stack of job rejection emails I'd been collecting like unwanted trophies. 27 of them, all arriving within the last 3 weeks, each one more puzzling than the last. We've decided to pursue other candidates. Unfortunately, your application does not meet our current needs. While your qualifications are impressive, we've chosen to move forward with someone whose experience better aligns with our requirements. I'd been in the industry for 8 years. My resume was immaculate. My references, all former supervisors and colleagues, had always sung my praises. Yet suddenly, doors that should have welcomed me were slamming shut, one after another with no explanation. I rubbed my temples, fighting back the familiar ache that had taken up permanent residence behind my eyes. The rejection from Meridian Publishing stung the most. I'd aced the 3 interviews, connected with the team, and the hiring manager had all but promised me the position. Just a formality, she'd said about the final decision. Then, radio silence followed by the standard rejection template. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Did you apply for that library position I sent you?" "They're still hiring," I sighed. From senior editor to library assistant. That's what my career trajectory had become in less than a month. I didn't bother responding. Another notification, this time Instagram. Megan, a former coworker I hadn't spoken to in months, had sent me a direct message. "Hey, been thinking about you. Wanted to check if you're okay? People are saying some wild things and I know they can't be true. Call me if you need to talk." My stomach clenched. People were saying things? About me? I quickly typed back, "What things? Who's saying them?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I probably shouldn't get involved. Just know I don't believe any of it. Take care." I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Whatever wild things. People were saying Megan clearly didn't want to discuss them over the phone. The knot in my stomach tightened. I scrolled through my social media, studying the comments and interactions, looking for clues. Nothing seemed off, but I noticed something else. The gradual disappearance of engagement. Posts that would have gotten dozens of likes a month ago were now lucky to get 5 or 6. Comment sections that once buzzed with friendly banter had gone eerily quiet. I was being ghosted, not by one person, but by my entire professional network. My phone rang, startling me. Alex Jenkins, my best friend since college and the one person I trusted without reservation. "Hey, what's up?" I tried to sound casual, normal. "We need to talk." His voice was tight, controlled. "In person. Can you meet me at Riverside Park in an hour? By the old willow." "Alex, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "Just meet me there, Emma. Please." He hung up before I could press for more. The walk to Riverside Park was a blur. My mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Had someone died? Was Alex sick? Was it about the job rejections? The mysterious things people were saying? I found him sitting on a bench beneath the sprawling willow tree where we'd spent countless afternoons during our university days, talking about dreams and futures that had seemed so certain then. "Thank you for coming." He didn't smile, didn't hug me. This wasn't my Alex, the guy who greeted me with bear hugs and terrible jokes. "You're really freaking me out." I sat beside him, maintaining the strange, uncomfortable distance he'd established. He took a deep breath. "I've been hearing things, Emma. About you. From multiple people in the industry." My throat went dry. "What things?" "They're saying you were fired from Westridge for stealing content, that you plagiarized work and passed it off as your own, that you," he swallowed hard, "that you slept with Richard Westridge to get your promotion, and when his wife found out, that's the real reason you were let go." The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the bench to steady myself. "That's insane. You know that's insane, right? I left Westridge on good terms to pursue better opportunities. I would never, I know." He finally looked at me, his eyes sad but certain. "I know you wouldn't. That's why I'm here. Because someone is systematically destroying your reputation, and it's working." "Who would do that? And why?" Alex hesitated. "Emma, I think it's Vanessa." "Vanessa." My closest female friend. The woman who'd been my confidant for the past 5 years. The one who'd held me when I cried after my breakup with David, who'd celebrated every career win with champagne and late-night conversations. Vanessa, who worked at Westridge Publishing in HR and had access to just about everyone in the industry through her extensive network. "That's ridiculous," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces began clicking into place. Her strange distance lately. The way she'd ask probing questions about my job interviews, only to offer vague encouragement afterward. How she'd been mysteriously busy whenever I suggested meeting up. "Jason from marketing told me she's been warning people about you." Alex's voice was gentle now, as if softening the blow could somehow make it hurt less. At first it was subtle. Little comments about your work ethic, questions about why you really left Westridge. Then it escalated. "How do you know all this?" My voice sounded hollow, distant. "Because she tried it with me last week. Said I should be careful about associating too closely with you professionally, that there were things I didn't know." When I pressed her, she backtracked, said she was just looking out for me. He ran a hand through his hair. That's when I started asking around. "Emma, she's blacklisted you. She's been telling these stories to every contact she has." I felt the bench beneath me, the cool autumn air on my skin, but it was as if I were observing it all from outside my body. This couldn't be real. Vanessa was my friend. We had history, trust. Why? The question came out as barely more than a breath. Alex shook his head. "I don't know. Jealousy? She's always talked about how quickly you were climbing the ladder. Or maybe it's about David. David, my ex. The relationship that had ended 6 months ago when I discovered his persistent emotional affair with a coworker. The breakup had been painful but clean. I'd moved on, or so I thought. What about David? They're seeing each other now. Have been for at least 2 months. The betrayal crashed over me in waves. Vanessa and David. David and Vanessa. While I'd been pouring my heart out to her about the breakup, had she been planning to take my place? Had she already been with him? Laughing at my pain, my obliviousness? "Emma, breathe." Alex's hand was on my back, warm and steady. "Breathe." I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I sucked in air, my lungs burning. "I have to talk to her." I stood up, wobbling slightly. I need to hear her say it. "That's not a good idea right now. You're upset, and confronting her when you're emotional might what, Alex? Make things worse? How could they possibly be worse?" My voice rose, drawing glances from a couple walking their dog nearby. "She's destroying my life, my career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. I know, and we'll figure this out. But right now you need to be strategic. Vanessa has influence. She's methodical. If you confront her, she'll just deny everything and spin it to make you look unstable." The rational part of my brain knew he was right. Vanessa Hampton was nothing if not calculated. It's what made her so effective in HR, so trusted by the executives at Westridge, so good at navigating professional politics. If she'd orchestrated this campaign against me, she'd have contingencies for every scenario, including me confronting her. I sank back onto the bench, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had surged. "My life is ruined," I whispered. "No one will hire me. People I've known for years think I'm some kind of plagiarizing homewrecker. And for what? Because she wanted my boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend?" Alex corrected gently. "And your life isn't ruined. It's under attack. There's a difference." I looked at him, this steadfast friend who'd always seen the best in me, who was here now when it felt like the rest of the world had turned its back. "What am I supposed to do?" "First, we document everything. Every rejection, every strange interaction, everyone who's suddenly gone quiet on you. Then we start rebuilding, one relationship at a time. We fight the whispers with truth. And Vanessa? What about her? She just gets away with it?" Something shifted in Alex's expression, a hardness I rarely saw in his usually kind eyes. "No," he said simply, "she doesn't get away with it." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on my ceiling, replaying every interaction with Vanessa over the past few months, searching for the moment when friendship had turned to sabotage. Had it been building all along? Had she always resented me, coveted what I had? Or was it something specific, some slight I'd committed without realizing? My phone glowed in the darkness. I'd been avoiding social media since my conversation with Alex, afraid of what else I might discover. But now, compelled by a morbid curiosity, I opened Instagram and went to Vanessa's profile. There she was, radiant in a sunset photo posted just hours ago. Life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need. Blessed new beginnings. I clicked on the image to expand it and felt my heart seize. David's arm was wrapped around her waist, his face half visible at the edge of the frame. In the comments, friends were gushing, "You two are perfect together!" The best couples start as friends. When you know, you know. I scrolled back through her feed. There they were again, 2 weeks ago at a rooftop bar. And again, a month ago, at what looked like a work function. Strategically posed photos where he wasn't explicitly featured but was clearly present. Building a narrative. Establishing a timeline that conveniently erased the reality of how they'd gotten together. I switched to my messages and typed out what I wanted to say to her. All the rage, all the hurt, all the betrayal condensed into a paragraph of pure vitriol. My thumb hovered over the send button. Alex was right. This wasn't the way. Vanessa had anticipated my every move so far. She'd expect me to lash out, to give her more ammunition to paint me as unstable, unprofessional, unhinged. I deleted the draft and set my phone aside. For the first time since discovering the truth, I allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air, my pillow soaked, my throat raw. I cried for the friendship I'd thought was real, for the career that lay in tatters, for the trust that had been so completely shattered. When the storm finally subsided, something else had taken root in the hollow space where my heart had been, something cold and clear and focused. Vanessa Hampton had systematically dismantled my life with calculated precision. She'd used her knowledge of me, knowledge I'd freely given her as a friend, to target every vulnerability, every dream, every relationship I valued. She thought she knew me completely. That was her first mistake. Because there was a part of me she'd never seen, a part that didn't forgive. A part that remembered every detail, every secret, every weakness she'd ever revealed in our late-night conversations. A part that knew exactly how to take someone apart, piece by piece, just as methodically as she'd done to me. I reached for my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "The Vanessa Hampton Project." Then I began to write. Morning brought clarity and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, a charcoal pencil skirt and crisp white blouse that had once been my armor in the corporate world, and made a pot of coffee strong enough to fuel the day ahead. My phone had 3 missed calls from Alex and a text. Checking in. How are you holding up? Call me when you can. I appreciated his concern, but I wasn't ready to share my plans. Not yet. Not until I'd laid the groundwork. Instead, I responded with a simple, "Doing better. Working on a strategy. We'll call later." The first item on my agenda required a trip to my storage unit. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the autumn air sharp in my lungs, revitalizing. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a place I rarely visited except to deposit or retrieve seasonal items. Today, I was after something specific. Boxes from my college years, meticulously labeled and organized because even then, I'd been the type to document everything. It took 20 minutes of digging through containers before I found what I was looking for. A leather-bound journal with a broken clasp and my name embossed in faded gold on the cover. Inside were entries spanning my junior and senior years, including the period when I'd first met Vanessa in a creative writing seminar. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, flipping through pages of my younger self's handwriting, searching for the details I only half remembered. There, dated March 15th, 7 years ago, V shared something disturbing today. Said she'd done something unforgivable at her last school. Wouldn't give details, but it involved another student who ended up transferring out. She seemed almost proud of it in a weird way, like she was testing my reaction. I changed the subject. Not sure what to make of it. And 2 weeks later, late-night conversation with V after too much wine. She admitted she'd created a fake email account to send messages from that girl to several professors. Inappropriate messages that got the girl called into the dean's office. V said the girl had deserved it for some perceived slight. She made me promise never to tell anyone. I feel sick about it, but gave my word. I remembered that night clearly now, the way Vanessa's eyes had gleamed as she'd confessed, watching me for judgment or approval. I'd been uncomfortable, but had chalked it up to college drama, something she'd grown out of. I'd kept her secret, becoming complicit in a silence that, in retrospect, had only enabled worse behavior. I took photos of the journal entries with my phone, then carefully replaced the journal in its box. This was just the beginning, a small piece of the puzzle I was assembling. Back at my apartment, I created a secure cloud folder and uploaded the journal photos. Then I opened my email and began composing a message to Dr. Eleanor Winters, the professor who had taught that creative writing seminar. We'd stayed in loose contact over the years, exchanging the occasional professional update. I kept the message casual, asking if she'd be willing to meet for coffee to discuss some research for a personal project about our old university days. Her response came within the hour. Emma, lovely to hear from you. I'm free this Thursday afternoon if that works for you. The usual spot on campus? EW. I confirmed the meeting and moved on to the next item on my list, creating a comprehensive timeline of Vanessa's activities and connections. I needed to understand the full scope of her network, the extent of her influence, and most importantly, where her vulnerabilities lay. For 3 hours, I mapped it out in meticulous detail. Professional connections through Westridge Publishing, social circles, family relationships, her insecurities, many of which she'd revealed to me during what I'd thought were moments of mutual trust, her ambitions, her fears. The picture that emerged was of someone both calculated and deeply insecure, someone who maintained a carefully curated public image while harboring resentments that festered beneath the surface, someone who eliminated perceived competition instead of rising to meet it, someone who had made the grave error of underestimating me. My phone rang. Alex again. Hey, I answered, trying to sound calmer than I felt. You said you'd call. His voice was concerned rather than accusatory. Sorry, I got caught up in research. Research? For job applications? I hesitated. Not exactly. Emma. There was a warning note in his voice. What are you planning? Nothing illegal, I assured him, which was true. What I was contemplating fell into murkier ethical territory, but it would stay safely within the bounds of law. I'm just gathering information. About Vanessa. It wasn't a question. Yes. A long silence stretched between us. Alex, I finally said, she didn't just spread rumors. She systematically destroyed my professional reputation. She's seeing my ex-boyfriend, who she probably started pursuing while consoling me about our breakup. She's been playing me for a fool for months, maybe years. Am I just supposed to accept that? No, he replied slowly. But revenge isn't going to undo the damage to your career. This isn't just about revenge. But even as I said it, I recognized the lie. Of course it was about revenge. It was about making Vanessa feel a fraction of the devastation she'd inflicted on me. It was about exposing her true nature to all the people she'd charmed with her facade of warmth and professionalism. Then what is it about? Justice, I said, the word feeling right on my tongue. Accountability. Making sure she can't do this to anyone else. Another pause. I won't try to stop you, Alex finally said. But I won't help you destroy yourself in the process of trying to destroy her. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll think about the end game here. I promise. This at least was sincere. I had no intention of destroying myself. Quite the opposite. This project had given me purpose, a North Star to navigate by when everything else had been taken away. Have dinner with me tonight, he suggested. Not to talk about any of this. Just a normal dinner between friends. You need to remember there's still a world outside of what she did to you. He was right, of course. Isolation would only make me more vulnerable. Italian? I suggested. I was thinking that new Thai place on 4th. 7 o'clock? I'll be there. After we hung up, I returned to my research with renewed focus. One name on my connection map caught my attention. Lawrence Hampton, Vanessa's father. A quick search confirmed he was still a senior partner at Hampton, Reed and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. I remembered Vanessa mentioning their complicated relationship, how she simultaneously craved his approval and resented his emotional distance. I dug deeper, searching for any public records or news articles about Lawrence Hampton. Most were standard mentions in legal publications or charity event photos, but one headline from 3 years ago stood out. Hampton, Reed partner takes leave of absence following ethics complaint. The article was brief, mentioning only that Lawrence Hampton was temporarily stepping back from his duties while the firm investigated an anonymous complaint regarding his handling of client funds. 2 months later, a follow-up piece reported that he had been cleared of all allegations and resumed his position. I made a note to explore this further. An ethics complaint serious enough to warrant a leave of absence, followed by a suspiciously quick resolution? There might be more to that story, and Vanessa, working in HR, would understand better than most how to file anonymous complaints that disappeared just as anonymously. My doorbell rang, startling me from my research. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the door and checked the peephole. David. My stomach lurched. I hadn't seen him since our breakup 6 months ago, hadn't spoken to him except to arrange the return of belongings we'd left at each other's apartments. And now he was here, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, looking exactly as I remembered him, tall, with perpetually tousled dark hair, and the kind of face that appeared more handsome in motion than in photographs. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but curiosity won out. What could he possibly want? Had Vanessa sent him to gauge my mental state, to see if I'd discovered their betrayal? I opened the door but remained firmly in the threshold, blocking entry. David. I kept my voice neutral, betraying nothing of the turmoil his presence triggered. Emma. Hi. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd once found endearing. Can I come in? Just for a minute? Why? He looked taken aback by my directness. I wanted to talk to you. About us. About everything. There is no us. There hasn't been for 6 months. I know. He sighed. Things ended badly. I've been thinking a lot about how it went down, and I feel like I never really explained myself properly. I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or an ulterior motive. Was this a genuine attempt at closure, or was there something more calculated behind it? Does Vanessa know you're here? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes widened slightly. Surprise followed by something else. Guilt? Fear? How did you... He stopped himself. It's not what you think, isn't it? You're dating my former best friend, the woman I confided in about our breakup. The woman who's been systematically destroying my professional reputation. What exactly am I thinking, David? He had the decency to look ashamed. She told me you found out about us. That's partly why I'm here. I wanted to explain. When did it start? I interrupted. Before or after we broke up? He hesitated just a fraction too long. After. Of course after. The lie was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Don't insult me. When? A beat of silence. Then, we got close while you and I were going through that rough patch. Nothing physical happened until after we ended things, I swear. The rough patch he referred to had been the 2 months before our breakup, when I'd been working overtime on a major project and had less time for our relationship. The same period when I'd noticed him becoming increasingly distant, critical, and prone to picking fights over trivial matters. So you had an emotional affair with my friend, then dumped me, then immediately started sleeping with her. And neither of you thought I deserved the courtesy of knowing. We didn't want to hurt you. This time I did laugh, a short, bitter sound. How noble. And I suppose Vanessa didn't want to hurt me when she started telling everyone in publishing that I'm a plagiarist who sleeps with married executives either. Just a series of selfless decisions on your parts. His face paled. What are you talking about? She wouldn't. She did. And based on your reaction, you didn't know. A small victory, seeing the realization dawn on him that he'd aligned himself with someone capable of such calculated cruelty. You might want to ask your girlfriend why I've suddenly been blacklisted from every publishing house in the city. Why former colleagues are treating me like I have the plague. Why my professional reputation has been shredded beyond recognition. He looked genuinely shocked. Emma, I had no idea. I swear. And I'm supposed to believe that? That she's been systematically destroying my life and you've been completely oblivious? Yes, he said quietly. Because it's the truth. I knew she was competitive, ambitious. But this? If what you're saying is true, it is. Then that's, he trailed off, struggling to find words. Psychopathic? Vindictive? Evil? I supplied. Take your pick. He ran both hands through his hair now, his distress evident. Good. Let him squirm. Let him wonder what else she was capable of, what other secrets she kept. I'll talk to her, he finally said. Get to the bottom of this. Don't bother on my account. In fact, don't mention this conversation to her at all. I'd hate for you to become her next target when she realizes you're having doubts. Fear flashed across his features just for an instant. He masked it quickly, but I'd seen it, the first crack in his perception of Vanessa, the first seed of doubt. I stepped back, preparing to close the door. I think we're done here. Emma, wait. He put his hand on the doorframe. I am sorry for how things ended between us, for not being honest, for all of it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of something unexpected. Pity. David was weak, easily influenced, willing to betray one person's trust for another's attention. And now he was caught in Vanessa's web, just as I had been. Goodbye, David. I closed the door firmly, turned the lock, and leaned against it, heart hammering in my chest. That conversation had been enlightening in ways I hadn't anticipated. David hadn't known about Vanessa's campaign against me. which meant either she was keeping her vindictive side carefully hidden from him, or she was compartmentalizing to an extreme degree. Either way, I'd planted a seed of doubt in his mind. A small disruption in what was likely an otherwise perfectly crafted narrative she'd spun for him about their relationship, about me, about everything. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was a start. Thursday arrived with gloomy skies and a persistent drizzle that matched my mood. I'd spent the intervening days digging deeper into Vanessa's past, uncovering bits and pieces that, on their own, might seem innocuous, but together formed a pattern of manipulation and retribution against anyone she perceived as a threat or an obstacle. I arrived at the campus coffee shop 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table that offered privacy without isolation. Dr. Winters was punctual as always, her silver hair cut in the same practical bob she'd worn since I'd first taken her class, her keen eyes missing nothing as she surveyed the shop and spotted me. Emma, she greeted warmly, setting down her umbrella and hanging her rain jacket on the back of her chair. It's been too long. Thank you for meeting me, Dr. Winters. Eleanor, please. We're colleagues now, not student and professor. She studied me for a moment, though I must admit I was intrigued by your email. A personal research project about university days? That's delightfully vague. I smiled despite my nervousness. I'm sorry for the mystery. It's a bit complicated, and I wasn't sure how to explain it in an email. She ordered a chai latte when the server approached, and I stuck with black coffee. When we were alone again, she leaned forward slightly. Well, I'm here now. What's this really about? I took a deep breath. Do you remember Vanessa Hampton? She was in your advanced creative writing seminar with me during my junior year. Eleanor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. I remember all my students, Emma. Ms. Hampton was memorable for various reasons. There was something in her tone that confirmed I was on the right track. I need to know about her time at the university. Specifically, any incidents or patterns of behavior that might have raised concerns. Eleanor sat back, her hands wrapped around her mug. That's a rather unusual request. May I ask why you're interested in this information after all these years? I had prepared for this question, knowing that Eleanor Winters was not someone easily swayed by vague explanations or emotional appeals. She required substance, evidence, reason. Vanessa has been systematically spreading false rumors about me throughout the publishing industry, effectively blacklisting me from positions I'm qualified for. I believe this is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of behavior that likely began during our university years. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A recognition, perhaps even a vindication. I see. She took a sip of her chai, considering her words carefully. What you're describing doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Though I'm sorry to hear you've become a target. Then there were incidents during university? She nodded slowly. Nothing that could be definitively proven. That was always the challenge with Ms. Hampton. She was careful to maintain plausible deniability. But yes, there were concerns. Like what? There was a promising young writer in your cohort, Melissa Chen. Do you remember her? The name was vaguely familiar. I think so. Quiet. Wrote those intense short stories about family dynamics? That's her. She was, in my professional opinion, the most talented writer in that seminar. Ms. Hampton seemed to recognize this as well, though not with admiration. There was an incident involving Melissa's final portfolio. I leaned forward. What happened? Melissa's laptop was stolen from the library 2 days before final portfolios were due. All her work was on it with no backups. A devastating loss for any student, but particularly for a writer who had spent months crafting those stories. Eleanor paused. The same day, another student reported seeing Vanessa Hampton leaving the library carrying a laptop that wasn't her own. When confronted by campus security, Ms. Hampton produced her own laptop and suggested the witness was mistaken. And Melissa's laptop? Never recovered. She had to piece together what she could from memory and earlier drafts. Her final portfolio, while still good, was a shadow of what it should have been. She lost the departmental award she was favored to win. And who won instead? Eleanor's gaze was steady. Vanessa Hampton. A cold sensation spread through my chest. You believe Vanessa stole the laptop to eliminate competition? I couldn't prove it. No one could. But yes, that was my suspicion. She took another sip of her chai. There were other incidents. A plagiarism accusation against another promising student that was eventually dismissed, but not before creating significant distress. Anonymous complaints about professors who had given Ms. Hampton grades she felt were unfair. Always just enough plausible deniability, always careful to maintain her image as the dedicated, passionate student. Did anyone ever confront her directly? I did once. Eleanor's expression turned grim. After the laptop incident, I had no proof, but I wanted to see her reaction. She was unnervingly composed, expressed appropriate concern for Melissa, offered to help in any way she could. Then, 2 weeks later, my university email account sent several inappropriate messages to other faculty members and students. Wait, your account sent them? Not you? Correct? Someone had accessed my account. The IT department confirmed it had been logged into from a computer in the student center during a time I was demonstrably teaching a class across campus. The content of these messages was designed to damage my professional relationships and reputation. The parallel to what Vanessa had done to me and what she'd admitted doing to that other student in her previous school was unmistakable. What happened? I was placed on administrative leave while the university investigated. Eventually, they determined I had been hacked, but the damage was done. Certain colleagues never quite looked at me the same way again. Several students requested transfers from my classes. And Ms. Hampton? She wrote me a heartfelt email expressing her dismay at what I was going through and offering her unwavering support. Eleanor's calm recounting of events couldn't mask the lingering bitterness. This had cost her, professionally and personally, even though she'd ultimately been cleared. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. "I had no idea. How could you?" It was handled discreetly, and I chose not to discuss it with students. She studied me. "May I ask what specifically, Ms. Hampton has been saying about you?" I explained the rumors, the rejections, the evidence Alex had gathered. Eleanor listened intently, occasionally nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. "Have you considered legal action?" she asked when I finished. "Defamation suits are difficult to win, but with the right evidence. The problem is proof. Everything has been verbal, carefully phrased as concern rather than accusation. I'm worried about Emma, not Emma did this." "Classic technique?" Eleanor murmured. "Present yourself as the concerned friend while planting the seed of doubt." "Exactly. And even if I could prove it, a lawsuit would be public. The allegations would be repeated in court documents, media coverage. It would only amplify the damage. So what do you intend to do with this information about her university days?" I hesitated. How much should I reveal about my evolving plan? Eleanor Winters had always been fair but strict, a stickler for ethics and integrity. "I'm building a complete picture," I said carefully. "Understanding the pattern helps me anticipate her next moves and protect myself." Eleanor's gaze was penetrating. "And nothing more than self-protection?" I met her eyes steadily. "Would you judge me if there were more to it than that?" A long moment passed between us, heavy with unspoken understanding. 7 years ago, I chose to remain professionally detached when I suspected one student was sabotaging another, she finally said. I followed procedure, reported my concerns through proper channels, and trusted the system to address the problem. That trust was misplaced, and as a result, Ms. Hampton continued her behavior unchecked, causing harm to others, including, it seems, you. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. If I were in your position now, with the benefit of hindsight and the knowledge that institutional channels had failed, I might consider more direct methods of ensuring accountability. My respect for Eleanor Winters, already substantial, deepened immeasurably in that moment. "Thank you," I said simply. "I can put you in touch with Melissa Chen if you'd like. She's a published author now, worked through a smaller press after being inexplicably rejected by the major houses. I suspect Ms. Hampton's influence may have extended there as well. I would appreciate that very much." Eleanor nodded. "I'll email you her contact information." "And Emma?" "Yes. Whatever course you choose, be careful. Not just of legal consequences, but of allowing this pursuit to consume you. Ms. Hampton's greatest victory would be turning you into someone like her." Her words struck home with uncomfortable precision. The cold focus I'd been nurturing, the meticulous planning, the growing file of vulnerabilities and pressure points, was I becoming the very thing I despised? No, I decided firmly. There was a fundamental difference. Vanessa destroyed others to elevate herself, attacked without provocation, betrayed trust, freely given. What I was contemplating was a response to harm already inflicted, a correction of an injustice that would otherwise go unaddressed. "I understand," I told Eleanor, "and I promise I won't let that happen." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics after that: recent literary discoveries, academic gossip, memories of more pleasant aspects of university life. When we parted, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Back at my apartment, I added the new information to my growing file on Vanessa Hampton. The pattern was becoming clearer: identify a threat, isolate them socially or professionally, systematically dismantle their reputation or opportunities, then present yourself as sympathetic while benefiting from their downfall. She had done it to Melissa Chen, securing an award that should have been Melissa's. She had done it to Eleanor Winters, punishing her for asking too many questions. She had done it to that unnamed student at her previous school, driving them to transfer, and now she was doing it to me, clearing me from a professional path she wanted to claim for herself, while simultaneously taking my ex-boyfriend, perhaps less because she wanted him, and more because he had been mine. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Eleanor, true to her word, had sent Melissa Chen's contact information along with a brief note. "I've already reached out to let her know you might be in touch." She seemed eager to talk. EW. I immediately composed an email to Melissa, keeping it professional but hinting at the true purpose of my outreach. "Dear Melissa Doctor, Eleanor Winters suggested I contact you regarding research I'm conducting on patterns of professional sabotage in creative industries. As someone who may have experienced similar challenges to those I'm currently facing, your insights would be invaluable. Would you be willing to speak with me either by phone or video call at your convenience? Thank you for your consideration, Emma Sullivan." The response came within an hour. "Emma, Eleanor mentioned you're dealing with Vanessa Hampton. I've been waiting years for this call. When are you free to talk?" "Melissa." We arranged a video call for the following evening. In the meantime, I had another angle to pursue. Hampton, Reed & Associates maintained a sleek professional website with bios of all their partners. Lawrence Hampton's page featured the expected credentials, case highlights, and community involvement, all designed to inspire confidence in potential clients seeking high-powered legal representation. What interested me more was the news section of the site, where I found press releases and announcements dating back several years. I searched for anything related to Lawrence's temporary leave of absence 3 years ago. There it was, a terse statement acknowledging his brief step back to address personal matters and expressing the firm's complete confidence in Mr. Hampton's integrity. The statement had been issued by Judith Reed, the managing partner. Further digging uncovered a single article in a legal industry publication that provided slightly more detail. Sources close to Hampton, Reed & Associates indicate the ethics complaint centered around alleged mismanagement of the Bellamy Foundation Endowment, a $50 million fund that Hampton has overseen for nearly a decade. The complaint was withdrawn after a brief internal investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing. The Bellamy Foundation. I made a note of it, then searched for any connection between the foundation and Vanessa Hampton. Nothing obvious appeared, but a social media deep dive revealed a photo from 4 years ago. Vanessa at a charity gala, standing beside an older gentleman identified in the caption as Charles Bellamy, founder of the Bellamy Foundation. She looked radiant in an emerald evening gown, her hand resting lightly on Bellamy's arm, her smile dazzling. The caption read, "Honored to represent Westridge Publishing at the Bellamy Foundation's annual gala. Literature changes lives, and the Foundation's commitment to supporting emerging writers is making a real difference. Bellamy Gala, literary philanthropy. An interesting connection, but not enough to draw conclusions. I needed more. I searched for Charles Bellamy, finding numerous articles about his philanthropy and business success. He had built a fortune in real estate development before establishing his foundation to support arts education and emerging artists across multiple disciplines. Now in his 70s, he remained active in the foundation's leadership while gradually ceding day-to-day operations to his executive director. A Society Page article from last year mentioned that he was a widower whose only daughter had died in a car accident in her 20s. No children or grandchildren. A man with immense wealth and no direct heirs. I was so engrossed in my research that I nearly forgot my dinner plans with Alex. A glance at the time shocked me. 6:45 p.m., giving me just 15 minutes to change and get to the restaurant. I quickly freshened up, threw on a casual dress and cardigan, and rushed out the door. Alex was already seated when I arrived, nursing a beer and checking his phone. He stood as I approached, his face breaking into a warm smile that momentarily pushed back the darkness that had been my constant companion since discovering Vanessa's betrayal. "You made it," he said, pulling out my chair. I was starting to wonder. Sorry, I lost track of time. I settled in, grateful for the restaurant's warm lighting and relaxed atmosphere. Research rabbit hole. Let me guess, not job hunting. I grimaced. "Can we not talk about that tonight? You promised a normal dinner between friends." "You're right, I did." He signaled the server. "Wine? Please. Red. The biggest they have." Alex laughed, and for a moment, it felt like old times, before betrayal and revenge had become the center of my existence. He ordered wine for me and another beer for himself, along with appetizers for us to share. "So," he said once the server had gone, "tell me about literally anything except your revenge plans or job situation." I smiled despite myself. That doesn't leave much. "Sure it does. Books you're reading, shows you're watching. That weird neighbor who practices opera at 7 a.m. every Sunday, Mrs. Abernathy. And it's not opera, it's show tunes. Last Sunday was the entire soundtrack of Cats. See? This is the quality content I'm here for." The wine arrived, and I took a generous sip, feeling some of the tension drain from my shoulders. For the next hour, we maintained the illusion of normalcy, discussing everything from the latest Netflix series we'd both binged to a mutual friend's disastrous attempt at home brewing. It wasn't until dessert, a shared chocolate lava cake that had been our tradition since college, that Alex broke the unspoken rule. "Have you thought about looking for positions outside publishing?" he asked carefully. "Just temporarily until this blows over." I set down my fork. "It's not gonna blow over, Alex. Not without intervention. And I've spent 8 years building my career in publishing. I'm not walking away because Vanessa Hampton decided to destroy me. I'm not suggesting you give up. Just a strategic retreat. Take a related position in another industry where her influence doesn't reach. Build new connections, then come back stronger. While she gets away with it?" I shook my head. "No." Alex studied me, concern evident in his eyes. "Emma, I'm worried about you. This focus on Vanessa, on revenge, it's consuming you. I hardly recognize the person sitting across from me sometimes." His words stung, echoing Eleanor's warning too closely for comfort. "What would you have me do? Forgive her? Turn the other cheek? No. But there's a difference between holding someone accountable and becoming obsessed with their destruction. Is that what you think I'm doing? Becoming obsessed?" He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "I think you're in pain. I think you've been betrayed by someone you trusted, and that's a wound that cuts deep. I just don't want to see that pain turn you into someone you'll later regret becoming." I pulled my hand back, not ready for the comfort he offered, not ready to examine too closely the hardening of my heart that had occurred over the past weeks. "I appreciate your concern," I said, more stiffly than I intended. "But I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're spending every waking hour plotting elaborate revenge instead of rebuilding your life. They're not mutually exclusive, aren't they? When was the last time you applied for a job? Reached out to a contact who might actually help your career? Did anything that wasn't related to taking Vanessa down?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. He was right, and we both knew it. "The job market is poisoned against me right now," I finally said. "Any application would be a waste of time until I clear my name." "And how exactly will your research accomplish that? Will exposing Vanessa's past behavior magically undo the damage to your reputation?" "No," I admitted. "But it will stop her from continuing to destroy it. And it will show people who she really is, beneath the carefully crafted image." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Emma, I love you. You're my best friend. I will support you through anything, but I need you to really think about the end game here. What does victory look like to you? And will it actually give you what you need to move forward?" His questions hit harder than I expected, forcing me to confront aspects of my plan, or lack thereof, that I'd been avoiding. What did victory look like? Vanessa exposed? Humiliated? Professionally ruined as she had tried to ruin me? And then what? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just know I can't let her get away with this." His expression softened. "Okay, that's fair. But promise me you'll think about what comes after. Because there will be an after, Emma. And I want it to be one where you can look in the mirror and still recognize yourself." The remainder of our evening was subdued but not uncomfortable. When we parted outside the restaurant, Alex hugged me tightly, whispering, "Just be careful, okay?" into my hair. "I will," I promised, meaning it more than he knew. Back at my apartment, I found myself standing before the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection as Alex's words echoed in my mind. Did I recognize the person staring back at me? The circles under my eyes were darker, my expression harder than it had been a month ago. But behind the fatigue and determination, I was still there, still Emma Sullivan, still governed by the principles and values that had always defined me. The difference was that now I understood something I hadn't before. Justice and mercy might be virtues, but so was self-preservation. And sometimes the only way to preserve yourself was to fight back with every tool at your disposal. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder, video call with Melissa Chen tomorrow at 7 p.m. I set it aside and went to bed, dreaming of secrets exposed and truths finally brought to light. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. I organized my notes, reviewed the key questions I wanted to ask Melissa, and continued my research into the Bellamy Foundation and its connection to both Lawrence Hampton and Vanessa. At precisely 7 p.m., my laptop chimed with an incoming video call. I straightened my posture, put on what I hoped was a professional but approachable expression, and accepted the connection. Melissa Chen's face appeared on my screen. She was in her mid-30s like me, with straight black hair cut in a stylish bob and intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. Her home office, visible in the background, was tidy and minimalist, with carefully arranged bookshelves. "Emma Sullivan," she said, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of something harder. "Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," I replied. "Dr. Winters speaks very highly of you." A smile softened Melissa's features. "Eleanor was a lifeline for me during some difficult times. When she told me you were dealing with Vanessa Hampton, I knew exactly what that meant." The smile faded. "How bad is it?" I gave her the condensed version of recent events, the rumors, the career sabotage, the personal betrayal. Melissa listened intently, occasionally nodding as if mentally checking items off a familiar list. "Classic Vanessa," she said when I finished. "The methods haven't changed, just evolved to suit a professional environment rather than an academic one." "Dr. Winters mentioned the laptop incident," I said carefully, watching her reaction. Melissa's expression tightened. "Did she?" "I'm surprised. The university worked very hard to keep that quiet. No formal accusations were ever made, despite the eyewitness. She told me her suspicions but said there was never any proof. There never is with Vanessa. That's her specialty, causing devastating damage while maintaining plausible deniability." Melissa adjusted her glasses. "The laptop contained 6 months of work. Original short stories I'd been developing for my final portfolio and the first 3 chapters of a novel. I had no cloud backups. This was before that was standard practice. When it disappeared, I lost everything except a few early drafts I'd printed out." "And you believe Vanessa took it?" "I know she did. A student saw her leaving the library with a laptop matching mine on the day it disappeared. But when questioned, she produced her own laptop, a similar model, and suggested the witness was confused. By the time campus security checked surveillance footage, the relevant time frame had already been overwritten. And the award you were favored to win?" A bitter smile crossed Melissa's face. "Went to Vanessa, whose portfolio was suddenly much stronger than anyone expected. There were passages in her work that, let's just say they shared striking similarities with ideas I'd discussed in workshop sessions, but hadn't yet seen in her writing. She stole your ideas. Along with my laptop, yes. But again, no proof. Just my word against hers, and she was very good at presenting herself as the dedicated, talented student who would never do such a thing." I leaned forward slightly. "What happened after graduation? Did your paths cross again?" "Not directly, but I felt her influence." Melissa's voice took on a clinical detachment, as if discussing someone else's experience rather than her own. "I completed my MFA and wrote a novel that received significant interest from several major publishing houses. Then, one by one, they all declined. The rejections were oddly similar, initial enthusiasm followed by unexplained cooling. I eventually published with a small indie press, and you think Vanessa was involved?" "I know she was." A friend who worked at Westridge Publishing confirmed that Vanessa, who had just started in their HR department, had made it her business to warn people about me, suggested I was difficult to work with, that my work wasn't original, that I had a history of making false accusations against colleagues. The parallels to my situation were unmistakable. Why would she continue targeting you after university? What threat did you pose to her? Melissa considered this. "I think Vanessa saw me as unfinished business. I never publicly accused her of stealing my laptop or my work, but I didn't hide my suspicions either. In her mind, that made me a loose end, someone who knew what she was capable of and might someday expose her. And you never confronted her directly? Once, after I learned what she'd been saying to publishers, Melissa's expression darkened at the memory. I ran into her at a literary event in the city. I'd had just enough wine to be brave, so I pulled her aside and told her I knew what she was doing. Asked her why she couldn't just let me exist in the same industry without trying to destroy me. What did she say? She looked at me with this expression of perfect confusion, then concern. Said she had no idea what I was talking about, that she'd always admired my work. Then she suggested that perhaps I should consider therapy for these paranoid thoughts. The gaslighting was so seamless, so convincing that for a moment, just a moment, I actually questioned my own reality. I recognized that technique. The same confusion, concern, and subtle suggestion of mental instability that Vanessa had deployed when confronted by Eleanor Winters. Did anything change after that confrontation? The active sabotage seemed to stop, or at least become more subtle. I think she decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. My career was already derailed from its original trajectory, and I wasn't making public accusations that might damage her reputation. Melissa paused, studying me through the screen. But you're different. You represent a bigger threat because your career was on a faster upward trajectory and because you were close to her personally. She shared things with you, showed you sides of herself she usually keeps hidden. That makes you dangerous to her in a way I never was. Her assessment aligned with my own analysis. I had been both a professional rival and a personal confidant, someone who knew too much about Vanessa's private thoughts, her insecurities, her secrets, including potentially information about her father. Melissa, did Vanessa ever talk to you about her family? Specifically her father? A flicker of surprise crossed her features. Not directly. She kept her personal life very compartmentalized. But there was one incident. A workshop where we were writing about formative childhood experiences. Vanessa's piece was about witnessing her father make what she called difficult moral choices for the greater good. It was deliberately vague but suggested he had done something ethically questionable that she had helped conceal. Did she give any specifics? No, and when our professor pressed for more concrete details to strengthen the narrative, she became defensive, said some things needed to remain private. Why do you ask? I explained my discovery about Lawrence Hampton's ethics complaint and its mysterious resolution. I believe there might be a connection to the Bellamy Foundation, where he managed a substantial endowment. Melissa's eyes widened. Wait, Charles Bellamy? The philanthropist? Yes. Do you know him? Not personally, but I applied for a Bellamy Foundation grant 5 years ago. It funds emerging writers, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. She frowned. My application was rejected despite strong endorsements. The rejection letter mentioned concerns about professional conduct that had been brought to their attention. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Let me guess, this was around the time Vanessa started working at Westridge. Yes. Melissa's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization. You think she influenced the grant decision? I think it's possible, especially if she had some kind of connection to Charles Bellamy or the foundation. It would explain a lot, Melissa murmured. The grant rejection never made sense otherwise. We talked for another hour, sharing details of our respective experiences with Vanessa and identifying patterns in her behavior. When we finally ended the call, I had pages of notes and a deeper understanding of what I was dealing with. Not just an opportunistic betrayal, but a calculated long-term strategy of eliminating perceived competition through manipulation and character assassination. But I also had something else. Confirmation that I wasn't alone. Others had experienced Vanessa's particular brand of destruction and survived. Melissa Chen had rebuilt her career, found alternative paths to publication, created a life that, while different from what she'd originally envisioned, was still successful on its own terms. It was a reminder that whatever happened with my revenge plan, there would indeed be an after, as Alex had put it, a future that extended beyond this all-consuming focus on Vanessa Hampton and her downfall. The question was, what kind of future did I want? And what was I willing to do to secure it? The next morning, I woke with renewed clarity and purpose. My conversation with Melissa had crystallized something important. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. It was about stopping a pattern of behavior that had harmed multiple people over many years. It was about preventing Vanessa from continuing to destroy careers and lives with impunity. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Strategy. In it, I outlined what I now realized was a three-pronged approach. 1. Documentation. Gather and organize all evidence of Vanessa's past and present actions, creating an irrefutable record of her pattern of behavior. 2. Connection. Build a network of her victims and witnesses who could corroborate each other's experiences when the time came. 3. Leverage. Identify the pressure point that would be most effective in not just exposing Vanessa, but neutralizing her ability to cause further harm. For the documentation phase, I already had my conversations with Eleanor Winters and Melissa Chen, along with Alex's collection of testimonies from industry contacts about the rumors Vanessa had spread. What I needed now was to connect these isolated incidents into a cohesive narrative that revealed the true pattern. The connection phase would require reaching out to others who might have experienced similar treatment. Melissa had mentioned another student from their MFA program who had clashed with Vanessa and subsequently left the program under mysterious circumstances. Eleanor might know of other faculty members who had found themselves targeted after crossing paths with her. Each person I identified and contacted would potentially lead to others, creating a web of testimony that would be harder to dismiss as isolated misunderstandings or coincidences. But it was the leverage phase that would require the most delicate touch. Simply exposing Vanessa's behavior might damage her reputation temporarily, but someone with her skills at manipulation and image management would likely recover. I needed something more definitive, something that would not just reveal who she was, but remove her ability to continue her pattern of destruction. That's where the Bellamy Foundation connection came in. My intuition told me there was something significant there, something beyond the typical networking relationship. Vanessa rarely invested time in people unless they served a specific purpose in her carefully calculated life plan. I returned to my research on Charles Bellamy, diving deeper into his personal history and the structure of his foundation. Public records revealed that he had established it 15 years ago, following the death of his only child, Elizabeth Bellamy, in a car accident. The Foundation's mission statement explicitly mentioned honoring Elizabeth's memory by supporting the arts she had loved. A search for Elizabeth Bellamy yielded several archived news articles about the accident, which had occurred when she was just 24. She had been a graduate student in comparative literature, described by friends and professors as brilliant and full of promise. Her death had devastated her father, who had already lost his wife to cancer years earlier. One article included a photo of Elizabeth, a striking young woman with auburn hair and a confident smile. Something about her was naggingly familiar, though I couldn't place what. I continued reading about the foundation, learning that it had grown significantly over the past decade, expanding from modest writing grants to major endowments for arts organizations across the country. Lawrence Hampton's law firm had handled the foundation's legal affairs from the beginning, with Lawrence himself serving as the primary counsel and trustee for the endowment fund. And then I found it, a detail buried in a puff piece about the foundation's 10th anniversary gala. The article mentioned that Charles Bellamy had become particularly invested in mentoring young women in the arts, a role that associates say has helped fill the void left by his daughter's passing. Accompanying the article was a photo of Bellamy with 3 young women identified as grant recipients. In the center, smiling brilliantly, was Vanessa Hampton. The caption read, "Charles Bellamy with Bellamy Fellows, Vanessa Hampton, Janelle Morris, and Rebecca Winters at the Foundation's 10th anniversary celebration." I stared at the image, pieces falling into place with dizzying speed. Vanessa hadn't just received a grant from the foundation, she'd become a Bellamy Fellow, a position I hadn't come across in my previous research. And the way she stood next to Charles, slightly closer than the others, with his hand resting paternally on her shoulder. I searched for more information about the Bellamy Fellows program, but found surprisingly little. A brief mention on the Foundation's website described it as a selective mentorship opportunity for outstanding young artists demonstrating exceptional promise, but provided no details about the selection process or what the mentorship entailed. My phone rang, interrupting my research. It was Alex. "Hey," I answered, still distracted by what I'd discovered. "Just checking in. How are you doing after our dinner conversation the other night?" "I'm fine. Better, actually. I had a really productive video call with Melissa Chen, the writer-doctor Winters connected you with." "That's good. What did you learn?" I hesitated, not ready to share my developing theory about the Bellamy Foundation. Confirmation of Vanessa's pattern, mostly. She did to Melissa what she's doing to me now, sabotaged her professionally after perceiving her as a threat. Alex was quiet for a moment. So you have more evidence of her behavior. What are you planning to do with it? I'm still figuring that out. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. But I promise I'm being careful. And I'm thinking about what comes after, like you suggested. I'm glad to hear that. He sounded genuinely relieved. Listen, I'm meeting some friends for drinks tonight at the Atwood. Nothing fancy, just casual Friday night unwinding. Want to join? Might be good to step away from the research for a few hours. The invitation was tempting. A normal evening with friends, talking about something, anything, other than Vanessa and revenge and ruined careers. A brief return to the person I'd been before all of this started. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. What time? 8 o'clock. I can pick you up if you want. No need, I'll meet you there. Thanks for thinking of me, Alex. Always, he said simply, and in that single word was a reminder of why our friendship had endured for so long. His steady presence, his unwavering support, even when he disagreed with my choices. After we hung up, I returned to my research with renewed focus. The Bellamy Foundation connection was significant, I was sure of it. But how exactly did it tie into Lawrence Hampton's ethics complaint and temporary leave from his firm? And more importantly, how could I use this information as leverage against Vanessa? I needed more details about the ethics complaint that had led to Lawrence Hampton's brief departure from his firm. Legal ethics complaints were typically confidential, but sometimes parties involved would discuss them after resolution, especially if they felt vindicated. I searched for interviews or statements from Lawrence Hampton following his return to the firm. Nothing substantial appeared, just the standard press release announcing his resumption of duties. But a society page from around the same time caught my attention. A photo of Lawrence at a charity event, looking considerably thinner than in previous photos, with the caption noting his return to the social circuit following a health scare. Health scare? The firm's statement had mentioned personal matters, but nothing about health issues. Was this a convenient cover story for the ethics investigation? I searched for more information about Lawrence Hampton's health during that period, but found nothing concrete. What I did find, however, was a more recent article about changes at Hampton Reed and Associates, specifically the announcement that Lawrence would be transitioning to of counsel status over the next year, reducing his client load significantly. The article quoted Judith Reed, the managing partner. Lawrence has been an invaluable part of this firm for over 30 years. While we'll miss his daily presence, we respect his desire to focus on his health and family in this next chapter. Health again. And family, meaning Vanessa, his only child as far as I knew. Was Lawrence Hampton genuinely ill, or was this another carefully constructed narrative? I made a note to dig deeper into this angle, then returned to my investigation of the Bellamy Fellows program. A broader search yielded mentions of 7 women who had held the title over the foundation's history, including Vanessa. Of those, 5 had gone on to notable success in their respective fields. The other 2 seemed to have disappeared from public view entirely. One of those 2, Rebecca Winters, who had been pictured with Vanessa in that anniversary gala photo, had a brief but concerning digital footprint. A single tweet from 4 years ago, no longer available but preserved in screenshots on a literary gossip blog. The truth about Charles Bellamy and his mentorship will come out eventually. Some opportunities come with too high a price. Your silence no more. The tweet had apparently been deleted within hours of posting, and Rebecca's social media accounts had gone dormant shortly thereafter. The gossip blog had speculated about what she might have meant, but without further evidence, the story had faded away. I searched for current information about Rebecca Winters, but found almost nothing recent. Her author website hadn't been updated in years, and her publisher's page listed her debut novel as forthcoming, despite the date indicating it should have been released 2 years ago. It was as if she had simply vanished from the literary world. A chill ran through me as I considered the implications. What had Rebecca Winters discovered about Charles Bellamy? What price had she been referring to? And why had she gone silent so abruptly after that single cryptic tweet? I checked the time, startled to discover it was already 6:30 p.m. I needed to get ready if I was going to meet Alex and his friends at the Atwood by 8. I saved my research, made sure everything was properly backed up to my secure cloud folder, and reluctantly closed my laptop. As I showered and dressed, my mind continued working the problem. The connection between Vanessa, Lawrence Hampton, Charles Bellamy, and the mysterious disappearance of Rebecca Winters felt significant, perhaps the key to understanding the leverage I needed. But there was something else nagging at me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. That photo of Elizabeth Bellamy, Charles's daughter who had died so young. Why had she seemed familiar? I applied minimal makeup, chose a casual but presentable outfit of jeans and a nice blouse, and grabbed my keys. The Atwood was a 20-minute walk from my apartment, and the evening was pleasant enough that I decided to go on foot, using the time to clear my head. The bar was buzzing when I arrived, Friday night energy in full swing. I spotted Alex at a corner table with 3 others, Jamie and Miguel, whom I knew from previous gatherings, and a woman I didn't recognize with short blonde hair and an infectious laugh. Alex waved me over, standing to pull out a chair. "You made it!" "Everyone, Emma's here." He turned to me. "You know Jamie and Miguel. And this is Zoe. She works in my department." "Nice to meet you," I said, sliding into the empty seat. "Thanks for letting me crash your Friday night. Any friend of Alex's?" Zoe smiled, raising her cocktail in salute. Conversation flowed easily, centered around office gossip, a new restaurant Jamie had discovered, and Miguel's disastrous attempt at home renovation. I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. The weight of my obsessive research and revenge planning temporarily lifted. "So Emma," Zoe said during a lull, "Alex mentioned you work in publishing. That must be fascinating." I felt Alex tense beside me, clearly regretting that Zoe had raised the topic he'd been carefully avoiding. "It can be," I said, keeping my tone light, "though I'm between positions at the moment." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. This job market is brutal." "It certainly is." I agreed, grateful for her assumption that my unemployment was due to general market conditions rather than targeted sabotage. "What kind of publishing do you specialize in?" she asked, clearly interested rather than just making polite conversation. "Literary fiction, primarily. I was a senior editor at Westridge before..." I trailed off, uncertain how to finish that sentence without diving into territory I didn't want to explore tonight. Before deciding to explore new opportunities, Alex smoothly interjected, shooting me a look that said he had my back. "Westridge?" Zoe's expression brightened with recognition. "I have a friend who works in their marketing department." "Charlotte Davies? Do you know her?" The name was vaguely familiar. "I think we've met at company events, but we didn't work directly together. I should put you two in touch. She's always talking about how they're restructuring departments and creating new positions. Maybe there's an opportunity there." Alex jumped in before I could respond. "Speaking of opportunities, Jamie, didn't you mention something about your company expanding?" The conversation shifted away from publishing, much to my relief. Alex leaned close, whispering, "Sorry about that." I didn't know she was going to bring up work stuff. "It's fine," I assured him. "Actually, it was nice to talk about it casually, like I'm just another person between jobs rather than, you know," he squeezed my hand under the table, "you are just another person between jobs. This situation with Vanessa is temporary. It doesn't define you." I wanted to believe him. Sitting here with friends, engaging in normal conversation, it was almost possible to imagine a future where Vanessa Hampton and her betrayal were just an unpleasant chapter in my life rather than its defining catastrophe. The evening continued pleasantly, with another round of drinks and shared appetizers. I found myself genuinely enjoying Zoe's company. She was quick-witted and warm, with none of the calculated charm that I now recognized as Vanessa's signature. It was after 11 p.m. when we finally decided to call it a night. Outside the bar, Alex offered to walk me home. "I'm fine," I assured him. "It's not that far, and I could use the fresh air." "Text me when you get there?" His concern was touching. "I will. Thanks for tonight, Alex. I needed it more than I realized." He pulled me into a hug. "Anytime. I mean that." As I walked home, my mind drifted back to my research, to the connections I'd been mapping out before the evening's pleasant interruption. The cool night air cleared my head, allowing me to see patterns that had been just out of reach earlier. Elizabeth Bellamy, Charles's daughter who had died young. The nagging familiarity of her photo. Halfway home, it hit me with such force that I stopped walking. The auburn hair? The confident smile. The particular tilt of her head in that decades-old photograph. Elizabeth Bellamy had looked like Vanessa. Not identical, but similar enough that it couldn't be coincidence. Similar enough that an aging, grief-stricken father might see a ghost of his lost daughter in a young, ambitious woman who presented herself as the perfect candidate for his mentorship. And if Vanessa had recognized that resemblance, had purposefully cultivated it, and used it to forge a connection with a vulnerable, wealthy man looking to fill the void left by his daughter's death, that would be classic Vanessa, identifying a weakness and exploiting it for maximum gain, regardless of the emotional manipulation involved. But how did this connect to Lawrence Hampton's ethics complaint? And what had Rebecca Winters discovered that had led to her cryptic tweet and subsequent disappearance from public life? I continued walking, my mind racing with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. By the time I reached my apartment, I had formulated a theory that connected all the pieces, a theory so outrageous that I almost dismissed it immediately. But the more I thought about it, the more it made terrible sense. I sent Alex a quick text, letting him know I'd arrived safely, then opened my laptop and created a new document. In it, I outlined my theory. Charles Bellamy, wealthy and still grieving his daughter's death, creates a foundation in her memory. Lawrence Hampton, Bellamy's friend and attorney, helps establish and manage the foundation's substantial endowment. Vanessa Hampton, possibly through her father's connection, becomes aware of Bellamy and recognizes his vulnerability, his ongoing grief, and the physical resemblance she shares with his daughter. Vanessa cultivates a relationship with Bellamy, becoming a Bellamy Fellow, and gradually establishing herself as a surrogate daughter figure. At some point, Bellamy changes his will or creates a trust that benefits Vanessa, possibly at the expense of the Foundation's original mission. Lawrence Hampton, as the Foundation's attorney and trustee, either facilitates this change or discovers it after the fact. An ethics complaint is filed, possibly by someone within the Foundation who recognizes what's happening. The complaint is mysteriously withdrawn. Lawrence takes a brief leave and then returns with his reputation intact. Rebecca Winters, another Bellamy Fellow, discovers something about this arrangement and tweets cryptically about it before going silent. It was circumstantial, built on conjecture rather than hard evidence, but it fit Vanessa's pattern of identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities for personal gain. And if true, it would explain why Lawrence Hampton had been willing to damage his professional reputation to protect his daughter, because the alternative might have been much worse. I saved the document, encryption-enabled, then closed my laptop. It was past midnight, and despite the adrenaline of my realization, exhaustion was setting in. As I prepared for bed, one thought kept circling in my mind. If my theory was correct, Vanessa's manipulation of Charles Bellamy wasn't just unethical, it might cross the line into elder exploitation, a potentially criminal offense. And that would be the leverage I needed, not just to expose Vanessa, but to neutralize her completely. But first, I needed proof. The next morning, I woke with a clear objective: find Rebecca Winters. Her abrupt disappearance following that cryptic tweet about Charles Bellamy couldn't be coincidental. She knew something significant enough to make her withdraw from public life entirely. I started with basic online searches, confirming what I already suspected. Her digital footprint had all but vanished after that tweet 4 years ago. Her social media accounts were either deleted or dormant, her author website abandoned, her professional affiliations outdated. But people don't simply cease to exist, even when they vanish from public view. They leave paper trails, address changes, employment records, registration with professional organizations. I utilized every research skill I'd developed during my years in publishing, searching academic databases, alumni directories, and professional organizations for any trace of Rebecca Winters. After several hours, I found a promising lead, a listing in the Midwest Literary Review from just last year, crediting R.K. Winters as a copy editor. The initials were new, but the unusual surname and literary connection suggested it might be the same person. I searched for R.K. Winters editor and found a LinkedIn profile with minimal information, a copy editor based in Milwaukee with 5 years of experience, currently employed by a small regional publisher. The profile had no photo and listed no educational background, but the timing aligned. Someone who wanted to distance themselves from their previous identity while still working in a familiar field. I sent a carefully worded connection request. Hello, I'm researching the Bellamy Foundation's Fellows Program for a personal project and believe you may have insights that could be valuable. Would you be willing to speak confidentially? Thank you for considering. Emma Sullivan. Direct enough to signal my interest in the Bellamy Foundation, vague enough that someone unconnected to Rebecca Winters would simply ignore it, and discreet enough that if it was her, she wouldn't feel immediately threatened. While I waited for a response, I turned my attention to Charles Bellamy himself. If my theory about Vanessa manipulating him was correct, there might be public records that would support it. Changes to the foundation's board structure, unusual financial transactions, amendments to bylaws. The foundation's tax filings were public record, available through nonprofit databases. I downloaded the most recent 5 years' worth of 990 forms, settling in for a detailed review of financial statements that might reveal patterns or anomalies. 3 hours and half a pot of coffee later, I had identified several interesting developments. 1. 4 years ago, around the time of Rebecca Winters' cryptic tweet, the foundation had restructured its board, reducing the number of independent directors from 7 to 5. Dusra, that same year, a new position had been created, special advisor to the chairman, with compensation significantly higher than other staff positions. The person holding this role was not named in the public filings. Mundram. The percentage of the foundation's expenditures going directly to its stated mission of supporting emerging artists had gradually decreased, while administrative and consulting expenses had increased proportionally. Nangavadu. Most recently, the foundation had established a new legacy trust, with a substantial initial funding of $10 million, described vaguely as ensuring the continuation of the founder's vision. None of these changes were explicitly improper, but together they suggested a shift in how the foundation operated, a consolidation of control, increased spending on non-mission activities, and the creation of financial structures that existed alongside the foundation itself. My phone chimed with a LinkedIn notification, a response to my connection request, not on this platform. Email rkw.editor@privatemail.com if serious. My pulse quickened. This cautious response, neither confirming nor denying identity, but offering a more private communication channel, suggested I'd found the right person. Someone who wanted to control the conversation and protect their privacy. I immediately composed an email. Dear RK. Winters, thank you for providing a contact method. To be direct, I believe you were once a Bellamy Fellow who later posted a concerning tweet about Charles Bellamy and subsequently stepped back from public life. I'm reaching out because I'm investigating Vanessa Hampton, another former Bellamy Fellow. She has systematically damaged my professional reputation and career through false rumors and manipulation, a pattern of behavior I've discovered she's inflicted on others as well. In my research, I've uncovered connections between Vanessa, her father Lawrence Hampton, and Charles Bellamy that suggest something improper may have occurred regarding the foundation's resources. Your tweet from 4 years ago hinted at similar concerns. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak confidentially about your experiences. I have no interest in causing you further distress, and I understand if you're hesitant to revisit what may have been a difficult chapter in your life. If you're willing to share what you know, it could help not only my situation, but potentially protect others from similar harm. Respectfully, Emma Sullivan. I read it over twice, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. It was direct, perhaps too direct, but my instinct told me that Rebecca Winters would respond better to transparency than to vague allusions. Now all I could do was wait. I used the time to continue mapping connections between the various players in this increasingly complex web. Charles Bellamy, now in his 70s, had created the foundation 15 years ago. Lawrence Hampton had been involved from the beginning as legal counsel. Vanessa had become a Bellamy Fellow approximately 6 years ago, around the time she was completing her master's degree. The ethics complaint against Lawrence had occurred 3 years ago, followed by structural changes to the foundation. And somewhere in that timeline, Rebecca Winters had posted her cryptic warning about the truth regarding Charles Bellamy's mentorship program, then essentially disappeared from public view. My phone rang, startling me from my concentration. The screen showed unknown caller. Normally, I'd let such calls go to voicemail, but given the email I'd just sent, I answered. Hello? Silence then. Is this Emma Sullivan? A woman's voice, cautious and measured. Yes, it is. Another pause. This is Rebecca Winters. I received your email. My heart raced. Thank you for calling. I appreciate your willingness to— I haven't agreed to anything yet, she interrupted. How did you find me? Research. I'm an editor, was an editor, before Vanessa's rumors destroyed my reputation. Finding information is part of my skill set. And why exactly are you investigating the Bellamy Foundation? I chose my words carefully. Initially, I was only investigating Vanessa Hampton after discovering she'd been spreading career-ending rumors about me. The Bellamy Foundation connection emerged during that research, particularly the ethics complaint against her father and the unusual changes to the foundation's structure that followed. Rebecca was quiet for so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, "What do you know about the fellowship program?" "Very little. The foundation's materials describe it as a mentorship opportunity, but details are scarce. I know you were a fellow alongside Vanessa, and that you posted a concerning tweet about it before withdrawing from public life." "That tweet was a mistake," she said quickly. "I was emotional and said things I shouldn't have." Her tone suggested the opposite, that the tweet had been truthful, but had resulted in consequences that forced her retraction. "Rebecca," I said softly, "I'm not looking to expose you or drag you into anything publicly. I'm trying to understand what Vanessa is capable of and whether the Bellamy connection might provide leverage to stop her ongoing campaign against me." Another long pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Not over the phone. Not like this." "I understand. Would you be willing to meet in person? I could come to Milwaukee." "No," she said sharply. "Not here. Not where I live now." "Then where?" "Name the place." "I'll be there." She seemed to consider this. "There's a coffee shop in Chicago called Groundwork on North Clark Street. I can meet you there tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be wearing a gray scarf." Chicago was a 4-hour drive from my apartment, far enough from both our homes to provide neutral territory, close enough to be manageable for a day trip. "I'll be there," I promised. "Thank you, Rebecca." "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "And come alone. If I see anyone with you, I won't approach." "Understood." After she hung up, I sat motionless, absorbing what had just happened. Rebecca Winters had been so cautious, so insistent on security measures for a simple conversation. Whatever she knew about the Bellamy Foundation and Vanessa Hampton, it had frightened her enough to change her name, move to another city, and essentially start a new life. Which meant I was on the right track. The connection between Vanessa and Charles Bellamy wasn't just another networking relationship. It was something significant enough to provoke fear and drastic life changes in someone who had witnessed it firsthand. I booked a rental car for the drive to Chicago, not wanting to use my own vehicle in case anyone was monitoring my movements. Paranoid, perhaps, but Rebecca's extreme caution had put me on edge. Then I considered whether to tell Alex about this development. Part of me wanted to, knowing he would worry if I disappeared for a day without explanation. But another part hesitated. This meeting felt too critical, too delicate to share with anyone, even my most trusted friend. I compromised by texting him, taking a day trip tomorrow to follow up on some research. "Don't worry if you don't hear from me until evening." His response came quickly. "Research equals Vanessa stuff? Be careful. Call if you need me." Always protective, always supportive, even when he had reservations about my choices. I was lucky to have him, and the realization made me suddenly, acutely aware of everything Vanessa's betrayal had put at risk. Not just my career, but my ability to trust, to build relationships, to see the good in people. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions about what Rebecca might reveal, and how I would use that information once I had it. When my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I was already awake, running through mental preparations for the journey ahead. I dressed in casual, forgettable clothes, jeans, a plain sweater, comfortable boots. I packed light, just my phone, wallet, a small notebook, and a pen. After a moment's consideration, I also slipped a small digital voice recorder into my pocket. If Rebecca consented, having her account on record would be valuable. The drive to Chicago was uneventful, giving me 4 hours of open road to rehearse questions and scenarios in my mind. What exactly had Rebecca witnessed? How was it connected to Lawrence Hampton's ethics complaint? And most importantly, how could I use this information to neutralize Vanessa's campaign against me without becoming the very thing I despised? I arrived in Chicago with time to spare, parking in a public garage several blocks from the coffee shop. I walked the remaining distance, taking a circuitous route and occasionally stopping to window shop, checking for any signs that I was being followed. Nothing seemed amiss, but Rebecca's paranoia had infected me, making every passing glance from strangers seem potentially significant. Groundwork Coffee was busy but not crowded, with a mix of students working on laptops and professionals having informal meetings. I chose a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance, ordered a cappuccino, and waited. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman entered wearing a gray scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. She was in her mid-30s, with brown hair cut in a practical bob and wire-rimmed glasses. Nothing about her appearance was remarkable or memorable, precisely the point I suspected. Her eyes scanned the room cautiously before landing on me. I nodded once and she approached, her movements controlled and deliberate. "Emma?" she asked quietly as she reached my table. "Yes. Rebecca?" She nodded, sliding into the seat across from me. Up close, I could see the tension in her face, the wariness in her eyes as she surveyed our surroundings once more. "Thank you for meeting me," I said. "I'm still not sure I should have." She kept her voice low. "What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything you can tell me about Vanessa Hampton and Charles Bellamy? Your tweet suggested there was something inappropriate about his mentorship program." Rebecca's hands tightened around her purse. "Before I say anything, I need to know what you intend to do with this information." A fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with myself. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. My primary goal is to stop Vanessa from continuing to destroy my reputation and career. If what you tell me provides leverage to accomplish that, I'll use it. And if it's more serious than professional rivalries and rumors? If it involves potential criminal behavior?" My heart rate increased. "Is that what we're talking about?" She held my gaze steadily. "Answer the question. If I discover evidence of criminal behavior, I would report it to the appropriate authorities," I said carefully. "But my focus is on protecting myself and others from Vanessa's manipulation, not launching a criminal investigation." Rebecca seemed to consider this, weighing my response against some internal calculation. Finally, she nodded. "I was a Bellamy Fellow 5 years ago," she began, her voice barely audible above the coffee shop noise. "One of 3 that year. Myself, Vanessa, and another woman named Janelle. The fellowship came with a generous stipend, mentorship from established professionals in our fields, and regular meetings with Charles Bellamy himself." She paused as a server approached. "I ordered another cappuccino." Rebecca asked for tea. When we were alone again, she continued. "At first it seemed incredible. Charles was charming, attentive, genuinely interested in our work. But over time I noticed patterns. How the attention was distributed unevenly. How Vanessa received special consideration, private dinners, additional funding opportunities, introductions to influential people that the rest of us didn't get. Because of her resemblance to his daughter?" I suggested. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. "You know about that? I found photos of Elizabeth Bellamy. The similarity is striking." "Yes, though I didn't make that connection immediately. None of us did. It was only later when things began to feel uncomfortable." "In what way?" She glanced around nervously before leaning closer. Charles became increasingly focused on Vanessa. Their mentorship sessions grew longer, more frequent. He began referring to her as my dear girl and my legacy. The language was paternal, possessive. And Vanessa? How did she respond? She encouraged it, cultivated it, began dressing in ways that emphasized the resemblance to Elizabeth. I only realized this after seeing old photos of his daughter. She called him Charles at first, like we all did, but eventually shifted to Uncle Charles, creating this pseudo-familial relationship. The server returned with our drinks. Rebecca waited until she had gone before continuing. About 4 months into the fellowship, Charles invited all 3 fellows to his home for dinner. It was the first time we'd been to his personal residence rather than the foundation offices. The house was a shrine to Elizabeth. Photos everywhere, her artwork on the walls, her books still on the shelves. And in the dining room, a large portrait of her overlooking the table. Rebecca took a sip of her tea, her hand trembling slightly. During dinner, Charles kept looking between Vanessa and the portrait, this strange expression on his face, grief and hope and something else I couldn't name. Janelle and I exchanged glances, both uncomfortable with whatever was happening. But Vanessa seemed completely at ease, even pleased. What happened next? After dinner, Charles announced he had a surprise. He presented each of us with a small gift box. Janelle's contained a lovely fountain pen. Mine held a leather-bound journal, but Vanessa's... Rebecca paused, swallowing hard. Vanessa's contained a necklace, a delicate gold locket with a small diamond. Charles said it had belonged to Elizabeth. The implications were disturbing on multiple levels: a grief-stricken father transferring his affection to someone who resembled his dead daughter, that person deliberately cultivating and exploiting the connection. Did Vanessa seem surprised? Not even slightly. She acted touched, emotional, but not surprised. And when she put it on, Charles, he broke down, actually wept, said, "It belongs with you now." The whole scene was intensely uncomfortable for Janelle and me, but Vanessa managed it perfectly, comforting him, playing the role of surrogate daughter with practiced precision. "And this is when you began to suspect something inappropriate was happening?" Rebecca hesitated. "Not inappropriate in the way you might be thinking. There was never any suggestion of romantic or sexual interest from Charles. It was more a mutual exploitation. He got a replacement daughter, she got access to his wealth and influence. How did things escalate from there?" "Gradually. Vanessa began spending time at Charles's home outside of official foundation events. She was given a key, freedom to come and go. Charles started introducing her as like a daughter to me at public functions. The foundation's focus shifted, with more resources directed toward projects Vanessa expressed interest in." "And how did Lawrence Hampton fit into all this?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "He was aware of the developing relationship from the beginning. As Charles's attorney and friend, he was often present at foundation events. He and Vanessa maintained a professional distance in public, never acknowledging their father-daughter relationship. But I once overheard them talking when they thought no one was around." "What did they say?" "Lawrence was warning Vanessa to be more discreet. He said something like, 'The board is already asking questions about the special advisor position. If they connect it to you, everything we've worked for could be compromised.' Vanessa just laughed and told him to handle it, that Charles wouldn't allow anyone to interfere." "The special advisor position," I repeated. "I found that in the foundation's tax filings, a new, highly paid position created around the same time. That was for Vanessa?" Rebecca nodded. "Created specifically for her once the fellowship ended. A way to keep her officially connected to the foundation while providing a substantial salary. But it was just the beginning." "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "About 6 months after that uncomfortable dinner, Charles began talking about changing his will. He'd previously planned to leave his personal fortune, separate from the foundation's endowment, to various charitable causes. But now he wanted to create a trust that would give Vanessa control over both his personal assets and significant influence over the foundation itself. And Lawrence Hampton was facilitating this? Reluctantly, from what I could tell. During another conversation I overheard, he warned Charles that such changes might invite scrutiny or legal challenges, especially given Vanessa's position with the foundation. Charles dismissed these concerns, saying he knew what he was doing. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. How did you learn these details? It sounds like you were privy to private conversations and plans. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. I was Charles's editorial assistant in addition to being a fellow. I helped organize his papers, transcribe his notes, prepare correspondence. It gave me access to information the other fellows didn't have, including information about the changes to his will. Yes, I saw drafts of the documents, correspondence with Lawrence's firm. It was all carefully worded to avoid explicitly naming Vanessa as the beneficiary. The trust was for my chosen successor and legacy custodian, but the intent was clear from context. And this is what led to your tweet? The one about the truth and opportunities with too high a price? Rebecca looked down at her hands. Yes, I was struggling with what I knew, what I'd seen. It wasn't illegal. Charles was of sound mind, free to leave his money to whomever he chose. But the manipulation involved, the calculated way Vanessa had positioned herself, it felt deeply wrong. What happened after you posted that tweet? Within hours, I received a call from Lawrence Hampton. He was icily professional. Said he represented both Charles Bellamy and the foundation, and that my tweet could be construed as defamatory. He asked if I needed to be reminded of the confidentiality clauses in my fellowship and employment agreements. He threatened you, not explicitly. But the message was clear. She took another sip of tea. The next day, Vanessa reached out, suggested we meet for coffee, just to catch up. Her tone was friendly, but I knew better. I made an excuse, then spent the night destroying or securing any documentation I had related to the foundation. And then you disappeared. Changed your name slightly, moved to Milwaukee, started over? Rebecca nodded. I was afraid, but also disgusted with myself for being complicit for so long. I'd watched Vanessa manipulate a grieving man, stood by while she positioned herself to control resources meant for supporting artists like me, like Janelle. All because I was afraid of losing my fellowship, my stipend, my publishing opportunities. What about Janelle, the other fellow? Did she also recognize what was happening? To some extent. We discussed our concerns once cautiously, but she was more willing to look the other way in exchange for the professional advantages the fellowship provided. Last I heard, she had published her first book with significant marketing support from connections made through the foundation. I absorbed this information, seeing the fuller picture of Vanessa's operation. Not content with merely advancing her career through normal channels, she had identified a uniquely vulnerable target, a wealthy, grieving father, and systematically exploited his emotional needs for maximum personal gain. Rebecca, what about the ethics complaint against Lawrence Hampton? Do you know anything about that? Her expression changed, a flash of recognition crossing her features. Yes. That was approximately a year after my fellowship ended. I was already distancing myself from the foundation, but I heard rumors. Apparently, one of the board members, a longtime friend of Charles's late wife, became concerned about the changes to the foundation's governance and Charles's increasingly unusual behavior regarding Vanessa. What specifically triggered the complaint? From what I understood, this board member discovered that Lawrence had helped Charles transfer ownership of his primary residence to a trust controlled by Vanessa, while continuing to live there himself. The arrangement had tax implications that potentially commingled foundation and personal assets in questionable ways. The board member filed an ethics complaint against Lawrence with the State Bar Association, alleging he was enabling financial improprieties. But the complaint was withdrawn, I noted. Why? Rebecca's voice dropped even lower. The board member died. Heart attack, supposedly. 2 weeks after filing the complaint. The complaint was withdrawn by their estate's executor, who happened to be another partner at Lawrence's firm. A chill ran through me. Are you suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Rebecca said quickly. I'm just telling you the sequence of events as I understand them. The timing was noteworthy. The implications were disturbing, to say the least. While a natural death was certainly possible, the convenience of the timing raised troubling questions. After the ethics complaint was resolved, Rebecca continued, there was a restructuring of the board. Several longtime members resigned or were not renewed when their terms expired. New members, people with connections to either Lawrence or Vanessa, were appointed. The foundation's focus shifted even further from its original mission. And Charles Bellamy? How was he during all this? Increasingly isolated. Vanessa had gradually positioned herself as his gatekeeper, managing his schedule, screening his calls and visitors, even accompanying him to medical appointments. She portrayed herself publicly as his devoted surrogate daughter, selflessly caring for him as he aged. In private, from what I observed before leaving, she was making all significant decisions regarding both his personal affairs and the foundation. The full scope of Vanessa's manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated precision. She had identified a wealthy, vulnerable man with a specific emotional void, positioned herself to fill that void, isolated him from potential interference, and systematically gained control of his financial resources, all while maintaining a public image of selfless devotion. Rebecca, is Charles Bellamy still alive? She nodded. As far as I know, though he's rarely seen in public now. Foundation events are hosted by Vanessa as his representative. The official explanation is health concerns, but you suspect he's being kept isolated. It would be consistent with the pattern I observed. I took a moment to process everything Rebecca had shared. The information was damning, not just about Vanessa's character, but potentially about legal and ethical boundaries being crossed. May I ask what you plan to do with this information? Rebecca asked after a silence. It was the question I'd been asking myself throughout our conversation. My original goal had been simple: find leverage to stop Vanessa's campaign against me, to protect my reputation and career. But what Rebecca had described went beyond professional rivalry or even personal betrayal. It suggested a pattern of exploitation that might constitute elder abuse, financial impropriety, even potential involvement in silencing opposition through extreme means. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. This is more than I expected. Rebecca studied me, her expression softening slightly. You came looking for a way to defend yourself and instead found something much darker. Yes, for what it's worth, she said quietly. "I believe Vanessa Hampton is dangerous, not just in the usual ways ambitious people can be ruthless, but in a fundamental pathological sense. She views others solely as instruments for her advancement or obstacles to be removed. There is no line she won't cross if she believes she can avoid consequences." Her assessment aligned with what I'd learned about Vanessa's pattern of behavior stretching back to her university days. The laptop theft, the plagiarism accusations against rivals, the systematic destruction of others' reputations, all building toward this sophisticated, long-term scheme to control Charles Bellamy and his resources. "Would you be willing to put what you've told me in writing?" I asked. "Not for public disclosure, but as documentation in case it's needed later." Rebecca hesitated. "I don't know. I've worked hard to build a new life away from all this. Coming forward even privately could put that at risk." "I understand," I assured her. "Think about it. In the meantime, may I contact you if I have additional questions?" "Yes, but only through the email address I provided. And please be careful about what you write. Assume anything electronic could be compromised." Her continued caution reinforced the severity of what she was involved in. This wasn't just paranoia. It was the response of someone who had witnessed something genuinely threatening. "One last question," I said. "If you were in my position, targeted by Vanessa professionally, with this knowledge about her activities with Charles Bellamy, what would you do?" Rebecca considered this carefully. "I would document everything meticulously. I would identify potential allies, people who have also been harmed by her, people within the foundation who might have concerns, people who cared about Charles before Vanessa isolated him. I would build a case so comprehensive, so irrefutable, that when presented to the right authorities, it couldn't be dismissed or covered up. And then I would disappear," she said simply, "because Vanessa Hampton doesn't lose gracefully. And she doesn't forgive." The drive back from Chicago gave me hours of solitude to process everything Rebecca had revealed. The picture that emerged was far more complex and disturbing than I had anticipated when I'd begun investigating Vanessa's betrayal. What had started as a personal vendetta against someone who had damaged my career had evolved into something resembling a criminal investigation. The Vanessa Hampton I thought I knew, ambitious, calculating, willing to step on others to advance, was merely the surface of a much more dangerous individual. Rebecca's parting warning echoed in my mind. Vanessa doesn't lose gracefully, and she doesn't forgive. If I pursued this further, if I used this information to confront or expose her, I needed to be prepared for significant blowback. Yet doing nothing felt equally impossible. Now that I understood the full scope of her manipulation and exploitation, simply walking away seemed like an abdication of responsibility. It wasn't just about my career anymore, or even about holding Vanessa accountable for her betrayal. It was about protecting others from harm, Charles Bellamy, future potential victims, the artists who should be benefiting from the Foundation's resources. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. Exhausted but too wired to sleep, I made a cup of tea and opened my laptop. I needed to organize what I knew, identify gaps in the evidence, and make decisions about next steps. I created a secure document titled Bellamy Situation Complete Assessment, divided into sections 1. Key Players 2. Timeline of Events 3. Evidence Collected 4. Evidence Needed 5. Potential Allies 6. Risks and Vulnerabilities 7. Action Options under Key Players. I listed everyone involved: Charles Bellamy, Vanessa Hampton, Lawrence Hampton, the deceased board member, Rebecca Winters, Janelle Morris, and others mentioned peripherally in Rebecca's account. The timeline. Section tracked events from the establishment of the Bellamy Foundation through the present, with particular attention to significant shifts in control and resource allocation. Evidence collected included everything from my conversation with Rebecca to the Foundation's tax filings, the records of Lawrence's ethics complaint, and the pattern of Vanessa's behavior established through my previous research. Evidence needed highlighted critical gaps: confirmation of changes to Charles Bellamy's will or trusts, documentation of Vanessa's current role and authority, verification of Charles's current condition and circumstances, and corroboration of Rebecca's account from other witnesses. For potential allies, I considered who might have both knowledge and motivation to challenge Vanessa's control: surviving Foundation board members from the original configuration, Charles's longtime friends or colleagues, other artists who had been disadvantaged by the Foundation's shift in focus. The risks section was sobering. Rebecca's suggestion that Vanessa might be involved in something as extreme as a board member's conveniently timed death seemed paranoid on the surface. But was it, given the pattern of escalating boundary violations and willingness to silence opposition? At minimum, I had to acknowledge that confronting someone with Vanessa's resources, connections, and apparent lack of ethical constraints carried significant personal and professional risks. Finally, under action options, I outlined 4 potential approaches, ranging from least to most aggressive. 1. Personal protection only. Use the information solely as leverage to stop Vanessa's campaign against me without addressing the broader Bellamy situation. Dusra. Limited intervention. Approach Lawrence Hampton directly, indicating knowledge of the situation and requesting both cessation of Vanessa's attacks and some reform of the Foundation's governance, without public exposure. Mundram. Supervised intervention. Take the evidence to appropriate regulatory authorities, State Attorney General's office, which oversees charitable foundations, Adult Protective Services regarding potential elder exploitation, State Bar Association regarding Lawrence's role, allowing official channels to investigate and address the situation. Non-Gavadu. Public exposure. Compile the evidence into a comprehensive report and release it to media outlets, forcing public scrutiny of the Foundation's operations and Vanessa's role. Each option carried different ethical implications and levels of risk. The first might protect me but leave others vulnerable to continued exploitation. The second assumed Lawrence would respond rationally rather than defensively. The third relied on often overworked regulatory systems to take action on complex issues. The fourth could trigger unpredictable consequences, potentially harming innocent parties while also exposing me to maximum retaliation. I was still contemplating these options when my phone rang. At 2 a.m., an incoming call could only be an emergency. The screen showed Alex's name. Alex? What's wrong? I answered, immediately concerned. Emma. His voice was tight with tension. Where are you? At home. I got back a couple hours ago. Why? I've been calling and texting all day. You never responded. I checked my phone, noticing for the first time the multiple missed calls and messages. I'd been so absorbed in my conversation with Rebecca and the subsequent processing that I'd completely forgotten to check in. I'm so sorry. I had my phone on silent and got caught up in research. Research? He repeated the word flatly. In Chicago? With Vanessa's father? That stopped me cold. What are you talking about? You were seen, Emma, at a restaurant in Chicago, having lunch with Lawrence Hampton. What? No, that's not. I broke off, suddenly understanding. Someone had mistaken Rebecca for Lawrence Hampton and reported the meeting to Alex. But who? And why? Then who were you with? Alex demanded. Not Lawrence Hampton. I've never even met him. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I was meeting a source. Someone with information about Vanessa. A source. Alex's voice dripped with skepticism. You're investigating Vanessa like you're some kind of private detective now? It's complicated, Alex. No, it's not. It's obsession. You're so fixated on taking Vanessa down that you're disappearing for days, meeting mysterious sources, shutting out the people who care about you. His anger surprised me. Alex had been concerned about my focus on revenge before, but never this confrontational. Who told you I was meeting with Lawrence Hampton? I asked, trying to understand where this was coming from. A pause. It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Someone is feeding you false information about my movements. Who? Another hesitation. Zoe. Zoe? Your coworker? How would she know anything about what I'm doing? She has a friend who works at Westridge. She saw you in Chicago and thought it was strange, so she mentioned it. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Zoe, the friendly colleague Alex had introduced at the bar, had connections to Westridge Publishing, where Vanessa worked in HR. The casual conversation about my publishing background, the offer to connect me with her friend Charlotte, it hadn't been coincidental. Alex, Zoe is connected to Vanessa. She's monitoring me for her. That's paranoid, Emma. Zoe barely knows Vanessa. They've met at company events, that's all. Think about it. The timing of her appearance in your life, her specific interest in me, and now this false information about meeting Lawrence Hampton. She's reporting back to Vanessa. Or maybe, Alex countered, his voice tight, you've become so consumed by this revenge fantasy that you're seeing conspiracies everywhere. Maybe Zoe's friend genuinely mistook whoever you were meeting for Lawrence Hampton. Maybe not everything is about Vanessa plotting against you. His dismissal stung, especially because part of me recognized the possibility that I was becoming paranoid. But the specific detail about Lawrence Hampton was too precise to be coincidental. Someone wanted me to know I was being watched, wanted to create friction between me and my strongest ally. "I need you to trust me on this," I said quietly. The person I met was Rebecca Winters, a former Bellamy Foundation fellow who has information about Vanessa's relationship with Charles Bellamy. "I can prove it if necessary." "This is exactly what I've been worried about." Alex sighed, anger giving way to what sounded like genuine concern. "You're digging into people's personal lives, meeting with strangers, building conspiracy theories. This isn't you, Emma. This isn't who you are. You don't understand what I've uncovered. This goes beyond professional rivalries or personal betrayal. Vanessa is involved in something seriously wrong with the Bellamy Foundation. And that's your responsibility to address how, exactly? Are you a law enforcement officer? A regulatory investigator? Or are you someone whose career has been derailed, who's looking for any way to strike back?" His words hit home, echoing my own doubts about my motivations. Was I pursuing this because it was the right thing to do, or because it offered the most devastating form of revenge? "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe both. But what I've discovered can't be ignored." "Emma," his voice softened. "I'm worried about you. Really worried. You're isolating yourself, pursuing this vendetta at the expense of everything else in your life. And now you're meeting with strangers in other cities, being monitored by people connected to Vanessa. Do you not see how dangerous this is becoming?" He wasn't wrong. The stakes had escalated far beyond what I'd initially envisioned when I started investigating Vanessa's betrayal. What had begun as a quest for personal justice had evolved into something with potentially serious legal and physical risks. "I hear your concern," I said carefully, "and I appreciate it. But I can't walk away from this, not now. Too many people have been hurt by Vanessa's manipulation, and more will be if no one intervenes. Then do it properly. If you truly believe there's financial exploitation or elder abuse happening, report it to the authorities. Let them investigate. It's not that simple. The evidence I have is largely circumstantial, without more concrete documentation. So your plan is what? To gather this documentation yourself? How?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with since my conversation with Rebecca. How to obtain the hard evidence that would be necessary to prompt official action without crossing legal or ethical lines myself. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I'm still figuring it out." Alex was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "I can't support this, Emma. Not if it means watching you put yourself at risk or compromise your own integrity in the pursuit of revenge. If you have genuine evidence of wrongdoing, take it to the proper authorities. Otherwise, please consider stepping back, focusing on rebuilding your career, moving forward with your life." His words crystallized the choice before me: pursue this to its conclusion, potentially alone and at significant personal risk, or step back and focus on personal recovery, leaving the larger issues of Vanessa's behavior and the Bellamy Foundation situation for others to address. "I need time to think," I said finally, "to sort through what I know and decide what to do next. Promise me you won't do anything rash in the meantime?" "I promise." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, weighing options and consequences. Alex's concerns weren't unfounded. I was diving deeper into dangerous waters, potentially making myself a target for people who had already demonstrated a willingness to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. But walking away felt impossible now that I understood the scope of what was happening. It wasn't just about my career anymore. It was about a vulnerable elderly man being manipulated, about a charitable foundation being co-opted for personal gain, about a pattern of behavior that would continue to harm others if left unchecked. I returned to my action options document, studying the 4 approaches I'd outlined. After careful consideration, I added notes to each. Option 1, personal protection only. Ethically inadequate given knowledge of broader harm. Also potentially ineffective long-term as it leaves Vanessa in position of power and influence. Option 2, limited intervention via Lawrence. Relies on Lawrence Hampton acting against his daughter's interests and his own complicity. High risk of backfiring if he alerts Vanessa to my knowledge. Option 3, official channels. Most ethically sound but requires stronger evidence than currently possessed. Also slow and uncertain in outcome. Option 4. Public exposure. Highest risk to all parties including myself. Without irrefutable evidence, could be dismissed as defamation. Could harm innocent parties associated with the foundation. After reviewing these assessments, I added a fifth option. Option 5. Targeted evidence gathering plus official channels. Focus efforts on obtaining specific documentation needed to support official investigation. Once sufficient evidence is secured, submit comprehensive report to appropriate authorities. Maintain option for public disclosure only as last resort if official response is inadequate. This approach aligned with both my commitment to addressing the full scope of the situation and Alex's advice to proceed through proper channels. It acknowledged the current gaps in evidence while providing a specific focus for next steps. The question remained, how to obtain the documentation needed without crossing legal or ethical boundaries myself. Financial records, trust documents, evidence of Charles Bellamy's current condition, and the extent of Vanessa's control. These weren't things I could simply request or easily access through public records. As I contemplated this challenge, an unexpected message appeared in my email inbox. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line grabbed my attention immediately. Charles Bellamy Foundation, confidential inquiry. I opened it cautiously, mindful of potential digital traps. Ms. Sullivan, I understand you've been making inquiries about the Bellamy Foundation and certain personnel associated with it. I may have information relevant to your investigation. If you wish to discuss this matter, please come to the Rockwell Diner on Cedar Street tomorrow at 10 a.m. Sit at the counter and order coffee. I will approach you. Come alone and do not reply to this email. A concerned party. I stared at the message, pulse quickening. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone connected to my investigation, perhaps someone at the foundation itself, was reaching out. But was it a genuine offer of assistance or a trap? The request to come alone and not reply mirrored Rebecca's cautious approach, suggesting someone equally concerned about being identified. The public meeting location provided some safety, at least from physical threats. But the very existence of this email confirmed what I had suspected after Alex's call. My actions were being monitored. Someone knew I was investigating the Bellamy Foundation, knew my email address, and possibly knew about my meeting with Rebecca. The question was, friend or foe? I had less than 8 hours to decide whether to accept this mysterious invitation or ignore it. Less than 8 hours to weigh the potential value of new information against the risks of walking into an unknown situation. And with each passing minute, I became more certain of one thing. There was no walking away from this now. Too many pieces were in motion. Too many eyes were watching. Too much was at stake. Whatever path I chose, I had crossed a threshold from which there was no easy return. I barely slept that night, my mind cycling through scenarios of who might have sent the email and what they wanted. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would go to the meeting but take precautions. I texted Alex a deliberately vague message, meeting a potential job contact at Rockwell Diner on Cedar Street at 10 a.m. If you don't hear from me by noon, call me. It wasn't a lie exactly. This mysterious contact could potentially help restore my career, but it omitted the connection to Vanessa and the Bellamy Foundation. I couldn't risk Alex trying to stop me, not when I might be close to obtaining the evidence I needed. I arrived at the Rockwell Diner 20 minutes early, choosing a seat at the counter with a clear view of both entrances and the parking lot through the large windows. The diner was moderately busy with the tail end of the breakfast crowd, enough people to provide safety in numbers, but not so crowded that a private conversation would be impossible. I ordered coffee as instructed and waited, studying every person who entered. A businessman with a briefcase, an elderly couple leaning on each other for support, a group of college students laughing too loudly for the early hour. None of them gave me a second glance. At exactly 10 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. A woman in her early 60s entered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal pantsuit with a silk scarf draped artfully around her neck. Her silver hair was styled in a sleek bob, and she carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Her eyes swept the diner methodically until they landed on me. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, though I was certain we'd never met. She approached and took the seat beside me at the counter. "Coffee, please," she told the waitress, then turned to me. "Ms. Sullivan." Not a question. She already knew who I was. "And you are?" I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Judith Reed." She offered a slim hand, which I shook automatically. Managing partner at Hampton, Reed & Associates, Lawrence Hampton's law partner. The woman who had issued the statement when he took his mysterious leave of absence 3 years ago. My surprise must have shown on my face because her lips curved in a small, knowing smile. Not who you were expecting? No, I admitted, but perhaps who I should have been. She nodded approvingly, as if I'd passed some test. Shall we move to a booth? More private. We relocated to a corner booth far from other patrons. Judith waited until fresh coffee had been delivered, and the waitress had retreated before speaking again. I understand you've been investigating Vanessa Hampton and her connection to Charles Bellamy. Director, no pretense. No easing into the conversation. How do you know that? I countered. I make it my business to know when someone is asking questions about my partner's daughter, especially in connection with a significant client of our firm. Her tone was neutral, impossible to read. I couldn't tell if she was here to warn me off or offer assistance. Is that why you contacted me? To protect your firm's interests? Judith took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim of the cup. My interests and the firm's aren't always perfectly aligned, Ms. Sullivan. Neither are Lawrence Hampton's interests and his daughter's, though he seems to have forgotten that distinction. Something in her voice, a controlled bitterness perhaps, gave me hope that she might be a potential ally rather than an adversary. You disapprove of Vanessa's relationship with Charles Bellamy, I ventured. I disapprove of exploitation masquerading as affection, yes. She set her cup down precisely. Particularly when it threatens the reputation of a law firm I've spent 30 years building and the integrity of a charitable foundation that should be helping deserving artists instead of enriching one manipulative opportunist. My pulse quickened. Then we might have aligned interests after all. Possibly. She remained cautious. That depends on your motivations and intentions. Why are you investigating Vanessa Hampton? I considered how much to reveal. If Judith Reed could be trusted, she might be exactly the ally I needed, someone with insider knowledge and potentially access to the documentation I lacked. If she couldn't be trusted, sharing too much could be disastrous. She systematically destroyed my professional reputation through false rumors, I said finally. I started investigating to understand what I was dealing with, to find some way to counter her attacks. What I discovered led me to the Bellamy Foundation and raised questions that go far beyond my personal situation. Such as whether Charles Bellamy is being manipulated and isolated for financial gain, whether foundation resources are being misappropriated, whether your partner Lawrence Hampton has compromised his professional ethics to facilitate his daughter's schemes. Judith didn't flinch at these accusations, which told me they weren't news to her. And what do you intend to do with your findings? That depends on what those findings ultimately reveal, I said carefully. My goal is to stop Vanessa from continuing to harm others, myself included. How best to accomplish that remains to be seen. She nodded slowly. A measured response. I appreciate that. She paused, then asked, Have you spoken with Rebecca Winters? The direct reference to my meeting in Chicago confirmed my suspicion that my movements were being monitored. Yes, I acknowledged, seeing no point in denial. And what did she tell you? Enough to understand that this situation is more serious than a personal vendetta or professional rivalry. Judith studied me intently. Rebecca was right to be cautious. She was also right to speak with you. She glanced around the diner, then lowered her voice. What I'm about to share with you could jeopardize my career and potentially my safety. I need your assurance that you'll use this information responsibly. You have it, I promised, my curiosity now fully engaged. The ethics complaint against Lawrence Hampton 3 years ago. I filed it. This was unexpected. You reported your own partner? I had no choice. What he was facilitating crossed legal and ethical boundaries that couldn't be ignored. Her expression hardened. The complaint focused on Lawrence's role in restructuring Charles Bellamy's estate planning to benefit Vanessa, using his position as both Charles's attorney and the foundation's counsel to create conflicts of interest that he then exploited. But the complaint was withdrawn, I noted. After the board member who supported your position died unexpectedly. Judith's eyes widened slightly. Rebecca told you about Martin Cleary. She mentioned that a board member died of a supposed heart attack shortly after raising concerns. Martin was more than just a board member. He was Charles's oldest friend and his late wife's cousin. He was also in excellent health, had no history of heart problems, and had just passed a comprehensive physical the week before his death. The implication hung in the air between us, too serious to state explicitly in a public place. Why was the complaint withdrawn? I asked instead. Because I was given a choice. Bitterness tinged her voice. Withdraw the complaint voluntarily, or be removed from the firm I helped build, with my reputation in tatters. Lawrence had evidence, manufactured but convincing, that I had misappropriated client funds years earlier. Evidence that would have triggered a counter-investigation that would have destroyed my career, while the original complaint got lost in the ensuing scandal. You were blackmailed. Precisely. She sipped her coffee, her composure remarkable given the gravity of what she was sharing. So I withdrew the complaint, made a public statement supporting Lawrence's return, and watched as Vanessa's control over Charles and the foundation steadily increased. Why are you telling me this now? What's changed? Charles Bellamy is dying. The statement was blunt, matter of fact. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He has weeks, perhaps a month. Few people know. Vanessa has kept his condition as private as possible while preparing for what comes after. The changes to his will, I said, understanding dawning. The legacy trust I found mentioned in the Foundation's records. Yes. Upon Charles's death, control of both his personal fortune and significant portions of the Foundation's endowment will transfer to Vanessa through various legal structures Lawrence has created. The Foundation's original mission will be effectively rewritten to serve her interests while maintaining the veneer of charitable purpose required by law. The scope of Vanessa's manipulation was staggering. She had positioned herself to inherit not just wealth but institutional power and influence, all by exploiting one man's grief and loneliness. Why come to me? I asked. Why not take this information to the authorities yourself? Without documentation, it would be my word against Lawrence's, and Lawrence has spent decades building relationships with judges, regulators, and law enforcement throughout the state. Additionally, the most questionable activities have been carefully structured to maintain legal deniability, even when the ethical violations are obvious to those of us with inside knowledge. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small USB drive, sliding it across the table to me. This contains what you need. Financial records showing the commingling of personal and foundation assets. Email correspondence in which Lawrence acknowledges potential conflicts of interest, but proceeds anyway. Documentation of Charles's mental state assessments showing the progression of his isolation and increasing dependence on Vanessa for all decision-making. I stared at the small device, hardly believing what she was offering. Why give this to me? Why not use it yourself? Because I'm being watched, Ms. Sullivan. My access to these records was already suspicious. If I were to do anything with them directly, the connection to me would be immediate and obvious. And you think I'm safer? Less likely to be connected to this information? You're an outsider with a legitimate grievance against Vanessa Hampton, one that's already public within certain circles. Your interest in exposing her is expected, natural. Mine would raise immediate alarms. She paused. Additionally, you've demonstrated both persistence and discretion in your investigation so far. I believe you'll use this information effectively. I picked up the drive, the weight of it insignificant compared to the responsibility it represented. What exactly do you want me to do with this? That's your decision, but I would suggest taking it to the State Attorney General's office, specifically to Henry Mercer in the Charitable Organizations Division. He's one of the few officials I trust to handle this appropriately without being swayed by Lawrence's connections. I pocketed the drive, my mind racing with the implications of what Judith had shared. This is more than I expected when I came here today. It's more than I expected to provide. She checked her watch. I need to go. I've arranged to be in a client meeting across town in 30 minutes, my alibi for this time period. One more question, I said as she prepared to leave. Why now? If Charles is dying and these arrangements have been in place for years, why expose this at this particular moment? Judith's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the personal toll this situation had taken on her. Because Lawrence Hampton was once a man of integrity, someone I respected and considered a friend. What Vanessa has led him to become, the ethical compromises, the betrayal of his professional obligations, I can't stand by and watch the completion of that corruption. She met my gaze directly. And because what Vanessa is doing to Charles Bellamy in his final days is unconscionable, no one should die surrounded by lies, believing themselves loved when they're merely being exploited. With that, she stood, leaving cash on the table for her coffee. Be careful, Mrs. Sullivan. Vanessa is dangerous in ways you may not fully appreciate yet. And she's not the only one you need to worry about. I watched her leave, projecting calm confidence as she nodded to the waitress and exited into the bright morning sunlight. Only once she was gone did I allow myself to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just happened and the enormity of the decision now before me. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric, its contents both powerful and dangerous. I paid for my coffee and left, taking a circuitous route back to my apartment, constantly checking to ensure I wasn't being followed. Once home, I sent Alex a brief text. Meeting went well, back safely, before turning my attention to the drive. I didn't connect it to my regular laptop. Instead, I used an old computer I kept offline, one without any connections to my personal accounts or information. The contents were meticulously organized into folders: financial records, email correspondence, legal documents, medical reports, board minutes, personal notes. I started with the financial records, finding spreadsheets and statements documenting the gradual commingling of Charles Bellamy's personal assets with foundation funds. Transactions had been structured to appear legitimate on the surface: consulting fees, property transfers for program use, loans that were never intended to be repaid, but the pattern was clear. Millions of dollars had been diverted from charitable purposes to entities ultimately controlled by Vanessa. The email correspondence was even more damning. In one exchange, Lawrence wrote to Vanessa, "We need to slow down the transfers. Martin is asking questions about the Westwood property sale and why the proceeds went to the Legacy Trust rather than the Foundation's general endowment. Creating a paper trail showing program purposes for these transactions takes time and careful documentation." Vanessa's response: "Charles won't be happy with delays. He's increasingly anxious about finalizing everything for my future. Use that angle with Martin. Frame it as honoring Charles's wishes for his daughter during his lifetime." Other emails documented Lawrence's growing unease with the legal structures he was creating, even as he continued to facilitate them. In one message to his personal attorney, not affiliated with his firm, he sought advice on his own liability. "The conflict between my roles as Charles's personal attorney, the Foundation's counsel, and Vanessa's father has become untenable. If these arrangements are later challenged, my exposure could be significant. Are there additional protective measures I should be considering?" The legal documents folder contained drafts of trust agreements, amendments to Charles's will, and restructuring proposals for the Foundation's governance, all designed to consolidate control in Vanessa's hands while maintaining the appearance of proper charitable purpose. What truly chilled me, however, were the medical reports. They tracked Charles Bellamy's declining health over the past 2 years, from initial cognitive assessments noting mild memory impairment, to more recent evaluations documenting significant executive function deficits and increasing dependence on caregiver for decision-making. These reports predated his cancer diagnosis by many months, suggesting that Vanessa had been exerting undue influence while his mental capacity was already compromised. The board minutes revealed the systematic removal or marginalization of anyone who questioned the Foundation's direction. Meetings had become increasingly infrequent, with more decisions made by Executive Committee Action, a committee that consisted of Charles, Vanessa as his special advisor, and one reliable board member handpicked by Vanessa. Finally, I opened the personal notes folder, finding what appeared to be Judith Reed's own documentation of her concerns over time. One entry particularly stood out: March 15th, witnessed disturbing interaction between V and Charles today. He became confused during board meeting, couldn't recall previously approved budget allocations. V stepped in, speaking for him, stating what Charles means and what Charles wants. When Martin attempted to suggest tabling complex decisions until Charles was feeling better, V shot him a look of such hatred it was alarming. After meeting, overheard V berating Charles for his embarrassing lapse. His response was that of a chastised child, apologizing repeatedly and promising to do better. This is not a healthy caregiving relationship. It is control and emotional manipulation. By the time I finished reviewing the materials, hours had passed. The evidence was comprehensive, documenting not just financial impropriety, but a pattern of elder emotional abuse and exploitation. Vanessa had systematically isolated Charles, manipulated him emotionally, and positioned herself to benefit enormously from his death, all while presenting herself publicly as his devoted surrogate daughter. I sat back, overwhelmed by the weight of what I now knew and the responsibility that came with it. This was far beyond the personal betrayal and career sabotage that had started my investigation. This was elder abuse, financial exploitation, and the perversion of a charitable foundation meant to help artists in need. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Haven't heard from you since your brief message. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen, uncertain how to respond. I wasn't ready to share what I'd discovered, not until I'd decided on my next steps. But I also didn't want to lie to him. Processing some unexpected information from the meeting, I wrote back, "Need time to think. I'll call you tomorrow." His response came quickly, "Worried about you. Please don't do anything rash." If only he knew what I was contemplating wasn't rash at all, but carefully calculated. The question wasn't whether to act on this information, but how. Judith Reed had suggested taking the evidence to Henry Mercer at the Attorney General's office. That was certainly the most straightforward approach. Let the proper authorities investigate and hold the guilty parties accountable. But there were complications. Lawrence Hampton's connections in the legal community might still shield him from consequences. More importantly, the process would be slow. If Charles Bellamy was truly weeks from death, official intervention might come too late to prevent Vanessa from assuming control of his assets and the foundation. There was also the matter of my own situation. While exposing Vanessa's exploitation of Charles Bellamy would certainly damage her credibility, it might not directly address the rumors she'd spread about me. My professional reputation would remain in tatters unless specifically rehabilitated. What I needed was a strategy that would accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously: protect Charles Bellamy in his final days, prevent Vanessa from taking control of his assets and the foundation, restore my professional reputation, and ensure appropriate consequences for all involved parties. As I considered my options, a plan began to take shape, one that was emotionally satisfying while remaining ethically defensible. It would require precise timing, careful documentation, and strategic use of the evidence I now possessed. It would also require me to confront Vanessa directly, something I'd been avoiding until I had sufficient leverage. Now I had that leverage, and I knew exactly how to use it. I created a secure backup of all the files on the USB drive, then carefully outlined my plan, considering potential reactions and contingencies. By midnight, I had a clear strategy with a timeline for implementation. The first step would begin tomorrow morning with a visit to my old workplace, Westridge Publishing, where Vanessa still worked in HR, not to confront her directly, not yet, but to lay the groundwork for what would follow. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, the clarity of purpose providing a peace that had eluded me since discovering Vanessa's betrayal. When morning came, I dressed with deliberate care, professional but understated, nothing that would draw particular attention. I wanted to be remembered later, but not to stand out in the moment. Westridge Publishing occupied 3 floors of a downtown office building. I had worked there for 5 years before leaving to pursue other opportunities, the standard euphemism that had been true at the time, but now felt like a cruel joke given my current unemployability. The security guard at the reception desk recognized me immediately. "Ms. Sullivan! Haven't seen you in a while. Here to visit someone?" "Yes, Tom. I have an appointment with Charlotte Davies in marketing." The lie came easily. Charlotte was the colleague Zoe had mentioned at the bar, the connection that had made me suspicious of her intentions. Tom checked his visitor log. "Don't see you on today's sheet?" "Really? That's strange. She specifically asked me to come at 10:30. I frowned, the picture of mild confusion. "Would you mind calling up to confirm?" I'd hate to have misunderstood. Tom reached for his phone, but I stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Actually, since I'm here anyway, I should also drop off these reference materials for Richard." Richard Westridge was the company president, the man Vanessa had falsely accused me of sleeping with in her rumors. "I'll just take them up myself if that's okay. Save you the trouble of arranging a messenger." Tom hesitated, but 5 years of friendly morning greetings had built sufficient goodwill. "Sure, I can make an exception for you, Missa Sullivan. Just sign in here." He pushed the visitor log toward me. I signed, noting the time, 10:22 a.m. "Perfect. Thanks, Tom. I should be back down within the hour." I took the elevator to the executive floor where both Richard's office and the marketing department were located. The timing was deliberate, late enough in the morning that most people would be settled at their desks, early enough that many wouldn't yet have left for lunch. Maximum potential witnesses for what would come next. The elevator doors opened to the familiar reception area. Melissa, Richard's assistant, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise. "Emma! What are you doing here? I have an appointment with Charlotte in marketing, I said, maintaining the fiction. But I also wanted to drop off some materials for Richard if he's available. He's on a call right now, but he should be free in about 15 minutes if you want to wait. That would be great, actually. I'll just pop over to see Charlotte first. I headed down the hallway toward the marketing department, making sure to walk past the glass-walled conference room where the weekly department head meeting would be taking place. I glanced in, catching several familiar faces, including, as I'd hoped, Vanessa's. She was speaking animatedly, her back partially to the door, unaware of my presence. I continued past without pausing, not wanting to alert her yet. The marketing department was bustling with activity. I spotted Charlotte at her desk and approached with a friendly smile. Charlotte? Emma Sullivan. I don't know if you remember me. She looked up, confusion briefly crossing her features before recognition dawned. Emma, of course. You used to be an editorial, right? What brings you by? Actually, I'm following up on a suggestion from a mutual acquaintance, Zoe Murray. She mentioned you might know about some new positions opening up here. Charlotte's confusion deepened. Zoe Murray? I don't think I know anyone by that name, exactly as I'd suspected. Zoe had fabricated the connection as part of monitoring me for Vanessa. That's odd. She specifically mentioned you by name. She works with my friend Alex Jensen. Sorry, it's not ringing any bells. But I'm terrible with names sometimes. Charlotte offered an apologetic smile. As for positions, I haven't heard of anything specific opening up, but HR would know better than I would. Of course, I'll check with them before I leave. I chatted with her for a few more minutes about neutral topics, recent company news, mutual acquaintances, then excused myself, ostensibly to return to the reception area to wait for Richard. The timing worked perfectly. As I walked back down the main hallway, the department head meeting was breaking up, participants filtering out of the conference room. I positioned myself near Richard's office, making sure I would be visible from multiple angles. When Vanessa emerged from the conference room, engaged in conversation with the marketing director, I waited for the exact moment when she would have a clear sightline to me. Then I deliberately turned, making eye contact. The shock on her face was everything I'd hoped for, a momentary, unguarded reaction of pure alarm at finding me in the building she thought she'd banished me from through her rumors. She recovered quickly, composing her features into a neutral expression, but not before several colleagues had noticed her reaction. I smiled pleasantly and raised a hand in greeting, as if we were simply former co-workers with no particular history. Vanessa, hello. She had no choice but to acknowledge me, not with witnesses present. Emma, her voice was controlled but tight. What brings you here? Meeting with Richard, actually. He asked for my input on a manuscript. Another strategic lie, one that would directly contradict the narrative she'd been spreading about my departure and relationship with the company president. Richard? She couldn't quite hide her dismay. I wasn't aware you were still consulting for Westridge, just occasionally. When specific needs arise. I kept my tone light, casual, as if completely unaware of any tension. How have you been? It's been, almost 2 months since we last spoke? The reference to our last conversation, before I'd discovered her betrayal, hung in the air between us. I could see her calculating, trying to determine what I knew, what I was doing here. Busy, she replied finally. Very busy with? Various projects. I can imagine. I smiled again, letting a hint of knowledge show in my eyes. We should catch up properly sometime. I've been learning so many interesting things lately. Before she could respond, Melissa called from the reception desk. Emma, Richard can see you now. Excuse me, I said to Vanessa. Duty calls. Perhaps we can continue this conversation another time. Say tomorrow? Coffee at Revelry around 5? I have something specific I'd like to discuss with you. She hesitated, visibly thrown by my confidence and apparent lack of hostility. I'll check my schedule. Please do. It's important. I let the smile fade, meeting her eyes directly. Really important, Vanessa. I turned and walked toward Richard's office, leaving her standing in the hallway, watched by curious colleagues who had witnessed our exchange. The seeds of doubt had been planted, doubts about her narrative regarding my departure, doubts about her claim that I had been blacklisted, doubts about whatever explanation she had given for the end of our friendship. Richard Westridge rose from behind his desk as I entered, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. Emma, Melissa said you wanted to see me. Yes. Thank you for making time on short notice. I closed the door behind me, ensuring privacy for what would come next. What's this about? He remained standing, making no move to offer me a seat. Our relationship had always been professionally correct, but not particularly warm, and the tension in the room suggested he had heard the rumors Vanessa had spread. I'll be direct, Richard. I'm aware that Vanessa Hampton has been telling people I was fired from Westridge for plagiarism, and that you and I had an inappropriate relationship that led to my departure. His face flushed. I don't think... Please let me finish. I'm not here to accuse or confront you. I assume these rumors reached you, and that you denied them but took no particular action to stop them. That's understandable. Engaging with gossip often only adds fuel to the fire. He sat down slowly, his expression guarded. What exactly do you want, Emma? 2 things. First, I want you to know that these rumors are part of a larger pattern of behavior by Vanessa. She has systematically damaged my professional reputation throughout the industry, effectively blacklisting me from positions I'm qualified for. That's a serious accusation. It is. And I have evidence to support it, which brings me to my second point. I placed a folder on his desk. This contains documentation of Vanessa's activities regarding the Bellamy Foundation, where she has been manipulating Charles Bellamy and misappropriating foundation resources. As president of Westridge, which has received funding from the foundation and maintained a public association with it, you should be aware of this situation. Richard stared at the folder but didn't touch it. Why bring this to me? If you have evidence of wrongdoing, there are proper channels. Those channels are being pursued simultaneously. I'm informing you as a professional courtesy, given Westridge's relationship with the foundation and Vanessa's position in your company. The situations are about to become very public, and you should be prepared for the association. That caught his attention. Public? What exactly are you planning, Emma? Justice, I said simply, for myself and others who have been harmed by Vanessa's actions. I wanted you to hear directly from me what's happening, rather than being blindsided by events or relying on Vanessa's version of the story. I stood, making it clear the meeting was concluding on my terms. The documentation in that folder is yours to keep. Review it, verify it independently if you wish, and decide what action, if any, Westridge should take regarding an employee who has engaged in these activities. I'll be in touch if there are developments that directly affect the company. Richard looked from the folder to me, reassessing in real time. The confident, assertive woman standing before him was at odds with the narrative of desperation and inappropriate behavior that Vanessa had likely shared. I'll look into this, he said finally. Thank you. That's all I ask. I moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Richard. I would appreciate if you would keep the details of this conversation between us for now. Vanessa doesn't yet know the full extent of what I've discovered. He nodded, already reaching for the folder. Understood. I left his office with a sense of controlled satisfaction. The first phase of my plan had been executed perfectly. Vanessa had seen me in her workplace, where I should have been persona non grata if her rumors were believed. She had witnessed me meeting with Richard, the man she had claimed I'd inappropriately involved myself with. And now Richard himself had documentation that called Vanessa's character and activities into serious question. The balance of power had shifted, subtly but significantly. She would be off balance, uncertain of what I knew or what I intended to do with that knowledge. She would almost certainly accept my invitation to meet tomorrow, if only to assess the threat I posed. As I passed through the reception area, Melissa caught my eye. Everything okay with Richard? Yes, just catching up and sharing some industry information he should be aware of. I smiled. It was good to see you, Melissa. Pass along my regards to the team. Will do. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, It's good to see you, Emma. Things haven't been the same around here. That small validation, the implicit suggestion that I was missed, that my departure had left a void, warmed me unexpectedly. Whatever Vanessa had said about me, it hadn't erased 5 years of positive relationships and solid work. I exited the building and walked several blocks before allowing myself to exhale fully. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, but the tension had taken a toll. I found a quiet cafe, ordered tea, and reviewed the next steps in my strategy. By now, Vanessa would be frantically trying to determine what I knew and who I had spoken to. She would check with colleagues who had witnessed our interaction, probably seek out Richard to gauge his reaction to my visit. She might even consider warning her father that I was asking questions about the Bellamy Foundation. All of this was anticipated, part of my calculation. I wanted her rattled, off balance, unsure of where the threat was coming from or how extensive it might be. That uncertainty would make our meeting tomorrow far more productive than if I had simply confronted her directly without preparation. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Checking in. Did you ever call Henry Mercer at the AG's office? I hadn't told him about Judith Reed's suggestion or the USB drive. His question was either surprisingly prescient or indicated he knew more than he was letting on. Working on next steps? I replied carefully. We'll fill you in soon? I wasn't ready to bring Alex into this phase of the plan. His ethical concerns, while valid, might conflict with the approach I had chosen. Not because what I was doing was wrong, but because the personal satisfaction I would derive from Vanessa's downfall was a motivation he might question. The afternoon passed with meticulous preparation. I organized the most damning evidence from the USB drive into clear, concise summaries. I drafted talking points for my meeting with Vanessa, anticipating her likely responses and planning my counters. I prepared a separate file with documentation specifically addressing the false rumors she had spread about me, creating a clear narrative that could be shared with industry contacts to rehabilitate my reputation. By evening, I felt prepared for every contingency. I would meet Vanessa tomorrow, confront her with what I knew, and offer her a choice. Cooperate with my terms or face public exposure and potential criminal charges. Those terms would include 1. A complete retraction of all rumors she had spread about me, with direct communications to everyone she had influenced. 2. Her immediate resignation from Westridge Publishing. 3. Her withdrawal from all roles associated with the Bellamy Foundation. 4. Documented evidence of Charles Bellamy's current condition and the return of decision-making authority to his medical team and independent trustees. 5. A legally binding agreement to cease all further attempts at controlling the Foundation's resources. It was less than she deserved, but more than she would willingly concede without the threat of much worse consequences. The balance felt right: justice without vengeance, accountability without destruction. That night, I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, playing through various scenarios until I felt confident in my ability to maintain control regardless of her reaction. When I finally slept, it was with a sense of purpose and imminent resolution that had eluded me since this ordeal began. The next day passed with excruciating slowness, each hour crawling by as I waited for our 5 p.m. meeting. I received a text from Vanessa around noon. We'll meet you at Revelry, 5 p.m. Brief only. Have other commitments. Her attempt to assert control, to frame the meeting as a minor inconvenience in her busy schedule, was transparent and ineffective. I didn't respond, denying her even that small acknowledgement. At 4:30, I walked to Revelry, a coffee shop we had frequented during our friendship. The location was deliberate, a place with positive associations from our shared past, where the contrast between what I had believed our relationship to be and what it had actually been would be particularly stark. I arrived first, selecting a table in the back corner that offered privacy without isolation. I ordered a cappuccino and waited, reviewing my notes one final time before setting them aside. When Vanessa arrived, I wanted nothing between us but the truth. She entered at precisely 5 o'clock, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and slim trousers, her confidence apparent in her posture and movement. She scanned the shop, spotted me, and approached with measured steps. Nothing in her demeanor suggested someone concerned about being exposed or confronted. Either she was an exceptional actress, which I knew she was, or she still believed she maintained the upper hand. Emma. She didn't smile as she took the seat across from me. You wanted to talk. Thank you for coming. I kept my voice neutral, neither friendly nor hostile. Would you like coffee? This conversation might take longer than you've allocated. I told you I have other commitments. Her tone was dismissive, designed to establish dominance from the outset. Those commitments might need to be reconsidered in light of what we'll be discussing. I signaled the barista. She'll have a vanilla latte, extra shot, light foam. Vanessa's usual order, the kind of detail friends remember about each other. Still sweet, I see. She settled back in her chair, a hint of condescension in her voice. So, what was so important that you felt the need to create a scene at my workplace yesterday? I didn't create a scene, Vanessa. I simply existed in a space where you had worked very hard to erase me. That's not the same thing. The barista delivered her latte. Vanessa didn't thank her, didn't even acknowledge the service. Another small detail that spoke volumes about her character. Fine. What do you want? Direct now, impatient. I want to understand why you did it. I kept my tone conversational, curious rather than accusatory. Why you systematically destroyed my professional reputation. Why you spread rumors that I was fired for plagiarism, that I slept with Richard Westridge, that I was unstable and unreliable. Her expression barely flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, Vanessa. We're beyond that now. I have confirmation from multiple sources, including people you spoke to directly. There's no point in denying it. She took a sip of her latte, using the moment to assess her options. People talk, Emma. The publishing industry runs on gossip. If your reputation has suffered, perhaps you should examine your own actions rather than blaming others. The deflection was predictable but still infuriating. I controlled my response, keeping my voice steady. I have examined my actions thoroughly. The only thing I did to deserve this was to succeed in a field where you viewed success as a zero-sum game. Oh, please. She set down her cup with a sharp click. Don't flatter yourself. Your success was moderate at best. I have nothing to gain from undermining a middling editor with limited connections. And yet you did it anyway. The question is why? I leaned forward slightly. Was it because I was advancing faster than you expected? Because I had relationships with authors and industry figures you coveted? Or was it simply because you could, because destroying someone who trusted you gave you a sense of power? A flicker of something, irritation? Concern? Crossed her features before she masked it with a cold smile. You seem to have constructed quite an elaborate narrative about me, Emma. I'm not sure if I should be flattered by the attention or concerned about your apparent paranoia. The gaslighting attempt was straight from her playbook, the same technique she had used with Melissa Chen, with Rebecca Winters, with Eleanor Winters. Make the victim question their own perception, their own reality. It's not paranoia when there's evidence, Vanessa. And I have quite a lot of that. I reached into my bag and withdrew a single sheet of paper, placing it between us on the table. It contained a simple list of names. Every person I had confirmed she had spoken to about me, with dates and the specific accusations she had made. These are just the people I know about. I suspect there are others. She glanced at the list without touching it, her expression unchanged. Conversations happen. People ask questions. That doesn't constitute some conspiracy against you. No, but a coordinated campaign of nearly identical rumors, all traceable back to you as the source, certainly does. I took the list back, but that's actually not why I asked you to meet today. This caught her attention. No? No. The rumors about me are just one small piece of a much larger picture that's emerged during my investigation. I met her gaze directly. A picture that includes Charles Bellamy, his foundation, and the rather elaborate scheme you've constructed to gain control of both. There it was, the first crack in her composure, a tightening around her eyes, a slight change in her breathing. I don't know what you think you know. I know about your careful cultivation of a surrogate-daughter relationship based on your resemblance to Elizabeth Bellamy. I kept my voice low, factual rather than accusing. I know about the transfer of his personal residence to a trust under your control. I know about the special advisor position created specifically for you, with compensation far exceeding industry standards. I know about the restructuring of the Foundation's board to remove anyone who questioned your influence. With each statement, her expression hardened, the pretense of confusion giving way to cold calculation. Those are serious allegations, Emma. If you're planning to spread such defamatory claims, I also know about Martin Cleary. I continued, watching her carefully. About the ethics complaint against your father that was withdrawn after Martin's convenient heart attack, about the subsequent consolidation of control through the legacy trust that will transfer to you upon Charles's death, which, given his stage 4 pancreatic cancer, is imminent. She set down her cup with deliberate care. I don't know where you're getting your information, but you're venturing into dangerous territory. Charles Bellamy is a dear friend and mentor who has chosen to include me in his legacy because of our close relationship. Any suggestion of impropriety is not only false but potentially actionable. Potentially, yes, if I didn't have documentation. I let that sink in before continuing. Financial records showing the commingling of personal and foundation assets. Email correspondence between you and your father acknowledging conflicts of interest. Medical reports detailing Charles's declining cognitive function long before the cancer diagnosis, during the period when many of these arrangements were established. She stared at me, reassessing in real time. You're bluffing. Am I? I held her gaze steadily. Shall I continue? Perhaps with the details of your conversation with your father about the special advisor position, where he warned that board members were asking questions and you told him to handle it. or your instructions to Charles's doctors to limit outside visitors for his comfort, effectively isolating him from anyone who might question your influence. Her composure cracked further. Who have you been talking to? The question was sharp, demanding. That's not important right now. What matters is what happens next. I leaned back slightly, giving her space to process. I have enough evidence to trigger multiple investigations by the Attorney General's Charitable Organizations Division, by Adult Protective Services regarding elder exploitation, by the State Bar Association concerning your father's ethical violations. I'm prepared to submit this evidence tomorrow morning, and yet you're sitting here talking to me instead. Her voice had taken on a new edge, calculating, probing for weakness or opportunity. Why? What do you want? I want justice, Vanessa. For myself and for others you've harmed. I want accountability for actions that have crossed ethical and legal boundaries. I want to ensure that Charles Bellamy's final days are free from manipulation and that his foundation fulfills the purpose for which it was created. Very noble. Her tone dripped with contempt. But that doesn't answer my question. If you have this supposed evidence and believe in these causes, why not proceed directly to these authorities? Why this conversation? Because I'm giving you one opportunity to mitigate the damage to yourself, to your father, and to the foundation. I placed a folder on the table between us. These are my terms. Review them carefully. She didn't touch the folder. Terms. As if this were a negotiation. It is, in a sense. The consequences you face can be significantly reduced if you agree to these conditions voluntarily. The alternative is public exposure, multiple investigations, and potential criminal charges, for you and for your father. That last point landed as intended. For all her calculated selfishness, Vanessa did have one apparent vulnerability: her relationship with her father. Whatever its nature, genuine affection, mutual benefit, shared complicity, she would not want to see him face public humiliation and potential prosecution at the end of his career. She finally picked up the folder and opened it, her expression revealing nothing as she read through my conditions. When she finished, she closed it deliberately and placed it back on the table. These terms are unacceptable. You're asking me to dismantle years of legitimate work and relationships based on unfounded accusations and what appears to be stolen confidential information. The information wasn't stolen. It was provided by someone with legitimate access and serious concerns about legal and ethical violations. I kept my voice calm. And nothing about what you've done with Charles Bellamy and his foundation could be accurately described as legitimate work. You have no idea what you're talking about. A flash of genuine anger broke through her composed exterior. My relationship with Charles is real. He values me, trusts me, sees me as the daughter he lost. The arrangements he's made reflect his wishes for my future and for the foundation's direction. His wishes or yours? Did he spontaneously decide to restructure his estate and the foundation's governance, or were those ideas planted and nurtured by you? Did he choose to isolate himself from longtime friends and colleagues, or was that isolation engineered to prevent challenges to your influence? She stood abruptly, gathering her bag. This conversation is over. If you proceed with these ridiculous allegations, you'll be facing defamation suits from multiple parties, including the foundation itself. I remained seated, unruffled by her attempt to seize control of the interaction. Sit down, Vanessa. We're not finished. I believe we are. Then you should know that copies of all documentation have already been prepared for delivery to Henry Mercer at the Attorney General's office, to Richard Westridge at Westridge Publishing, and to 3 different journalists who specialize in financial fraud and elder abuse cases. This wasn't entirely true. I had prepared the packages but hadn't yet arranged for delivery, but she had no way of knowing that. Those will be sent immediately if you walk away now. She hesitated, then slowly sat back down. What do you actually want, Emma? Beyond these terms, what's your real goal here? I told you. Justice. Accountability. No one does this much work, takes this much risk, just for abstract principles. What's the personal angle? Is it really about the rumors? Your career? Or is there something else? I considered the question, surprised to find it resonated more deeply than I had expected. What did I really want? The easy answer was revenge, to make Vanessa feel the same devastation she had inflicted on me. But that wasn't quite right. It wasn't just about making her suffer, it was about correcting a fundamental imbalance. I want the truth to matter, I said finally. I want actions to have appropriate consequences. I want someone who has deliberately harmed others through manipulation and lies to face the reality of what they've done. Is that revenge? Maybe. But it's also justice. She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You really believe that, don't you? That this is about truth and justice rather than your own hurt feelings. What I believe is less important than what I can prove. And what I can prove is that you've engaged in a systematic campaign to destroy my professional reputation, while simultaneously manipulating a vulnerable elderly man for financial gain. I pushed the folder toward her again. These terms are non-negotiable, but they are considerably more merciful than what you deserve. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to accept them. After that, the evidence goes to the authorities and the media. She picked up the folder again, her expression unreadable. And if I agree to these terms, what guarantee do I have that you won't proceed with these allegations anyway? You have my word, which unlike yours has value. I stood, signaling that the meeting was concluding on my terms. 9 a.m., Vanessa. Not a minute later, I left her sitting there, staring at the folder containing the conditions of her surrender. As I walked home through the early evening air, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: satisfaction at having finally confronted her directly, concern about whether she would comply with my terms, and an unexpected hollow feeling where I had thought triumph would be. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. I had maintained control, presented the evidence convincingly, and left her with a clear choice between controlled consequences and uncontrolled exposure. Yet something felt unresolved, incomplete. Perhaps it was the lack of genuine remorse or recognition on her part. At no point had Vanessa acknowledged the harm she had caused, either to me or to Charles Bellamy. Her concerns had been entirely self-interested: how to minimize damage to herself, how to maintain as much as possible of what she had manipulated into her possession. Or perhaps the hollowness came from the realization that even complete compliance with my terms wouldn't undo the damage already done. My professional relationships had been poisoned, my trust in others fundamentally shaken. Charles Bellamy was still dying, still caught in a web of manipulation during his final days. The Foundation's resources had still been diverted from their intended charitable purposes. Justice, I was learning, was rarely as satisfying as the pursuit of it promised to be. When I reached my apartment, I found Alex waiting outside my door, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His expression was a mixture of concern and determination. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, "about Vanessa, the Bellamy Foundation, and whatever you're planning to do with that USB drive Judith Reed gave you." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "How do you know about the drive? About Judith?" He straightened. "Because I've been doing my own research since you started acting strangely. Because I was worried about you walking into something dangerous without backup. Because I care about what happens to you, even when you shut me out." I unlocked my door, motioning him inside. This conversation required privacy and probably a drink stronger than coffee. "You've been investigating my investigation," I said once we were inside, more statement than question. "Yes." He didn't apologize or look embarrassed. "After our last conversation, when you mentioned the Bellamy Foundation and seemed to be hinting at something beyond professional rivalries, I got concerned. I started looking into connections between Vanessa and the Foundation, which led me to notice the changes in its governance and funding patterns." I moved to the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "And Judith Reed? How did you know about her?" "I didn't, not specifically. But I know you met someone at the Rockwell Diner the morning after our argument. I was keeping an eye on you." Now he did look slightly embarrassed. "From a distance. I saw an older woman join you, watched you move to a booth for a private conversation. I didn't approach or eavesdrop, but I took a photo from outside and later identified her through public record searches." I poured 2 fingers of whiskey into each glass and handed one to him. "That's either impressively thorough or disturbingly stalkerish, Alex. I prefer concerned friend doing due diligence." He accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Emma, what exactly are you planning? And please don't give me vague reassurances about justice and proper channels. I want the actual plan." I took a sip of my whiskey, considering how much to share. After a moment, I decided on complete honesty. Alex deserved that much, especially after demonstrating how far he was willing to go to protect me. "I met with Vanessa an hour ago. I confronted her with what I know about her rumors against me and her manipulation of Charles Bellamy. I gave her until 9 a.m. tomorrow to agree to a set of terms that would limit the damage to all parties while ensuring she loses control of the Foundation and makes amends for the harm she's caused. And if she doesn't agree, Then the evidence goes to Henry Mercer at the Attorney General's office, to Richard Westridge, and to selected media contacts. The investigations that follow will likely result in much worse consequences for Vanessa and her father. Possible criminal charges, certain professional ruin. Alex sat heavily on my couch, processing this. You're giving her a chance to avoid the worst outcomes. Why? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly while formulating the plan, partly because complete destruction isn't necessary for justice. The terms I've set will ensure she can't continue harming others while still allowing her the possibility of rebuilding some kind of life afterward. And partly because involving authorities and media guarantees collateral damage to the foundation, to beneficiaries of its programs, to people who depend on its resources. And what about your career? Your reputation? Does your deal address those? Yes. One of the conditions is a complete retraction of all rumors, with direct communications to everyone she influenced. It won't immediately undo all the damage, but it's a start. Alex nodded slowly, then finally took a sip of his whiskey. It's more merciful than I expected given what she did to you. Is that approval I hear? I attempted a smile. Qualified approval. He met my gaze directly. I still think you should have involved proper authorities from the beginning, but I understand why you approached it this way. And I respect that you're offering a path that doesn't involve total destruction. Thank you. His understanding meant more than I had expected. I didn't tell you about all this because I wasn't sure you'd support my approach. You've been so concerned about me becoming obsessed with revenge. I still am. He set his glass down. But I also recognize that what you uncovered goes beyond personal vendettas. The Bellamy Foundation situation affects a lot of people and involves potential crimes. Taking action is appropriate, even necessary. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the tension between us finally easing. Then Alex asked, "So what happens now? We just wait until 9 a.m. to see if she accepts your terms?" That was the plan, but I'm not entirely confident she will. I took another sip of whiskey. She seemed unrepentant, calculating rather than remorseful. I'm concerned she might be looking for a way to neutralize the threat rather than comply with the terms. What could she do? If you have the evidence you say you have, she could claim it was fabricated or obtained illegally. She could try to discredit me further, make it seem like I'm acting out of personal animosity rather than legitimate concern. She could warn her father, who still has considerable influence and connections despite his ethical lapses. Alex considered this. So we should prepare for her to refuse and proceed with the evidence submission immediately before she can mount a defense. We? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, we. His tone brooked no argument. I'm involved now, whether you like it or not. And you could use the help, especially if this turns nasty. He was right. Having an ally in what might become a difficult confrontation would be valuable, both practically and emotionally. And despite our recent tensions, Alex was still the person I trusted most in the world. Okay. I smiled, a genuine one this time. In that case, let's prepare the evidence packages tonight, ready for delivery first thing tomorrow if necessary. We spent the next several hours organizing the documentation, creating clear narratives that connected the disparate pieces into a compelling case. Alex's analytical skills complemented my attention to detail, resulting in packages that were both comprehensive and accessible to those unfamiliar with the situation. By midnight, 3 identical sets of materials were prepared, one for Henry Mercer at the Attorney General's office, one for Richard Westridge, and one for a journalist Alex knew who specialized in financial misconduct stories. There's one more thing we should consider, Alex said as we finished sealing the envelopes. What if Vanessa tries a more direct approach to stopping you? Not just discrediting you, but something more immediate. The implication was clear. You mean, what if she tries to harm me physically? Or destroy the evidence? It's not outside the realm of possibility based on what you've uncovered. The convenient heart attack of a board member who raised concerns, the systematic isolation of Charles Bellamy, these suggest someone willing to take extreme measures when threatened. I hadn't wanted to voice this concern aloud, but it had occurred to me as well. What do you suggest? Don't stay here tonight. Come to my place. She knows where you live, and if she's desperate. He didn't need to finish the thought. Dramatic, but not unreasonable. I nodded. Let me pack an overnight bag. As I gathered essentials for the night, Alex secured the evidence packages in his briefcase. We left together, taking a circuitous route to his apartment and checking periodically to ensure we weren't being followed. The precautions felt excessive in the moment, but the stakes were high enough to warrant them. Alex's apartment was in a secure building with a doorman and keycard access, significantly more difficult to enter uninvited than my walk-up. Once inside, I felt the tension I'd been carrying begin to ease slightly. "Guest room is all yours," Alex said, showing me to a neatly kept spare bedroom. "Bathrooms stocked with extras if you need anything." "Thank you for all of this." I gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the accommodation, but his support throughout this ordeal. "That's what friends are for." He smiled, then grew serious again. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow could be a long day, regardless of which way Vanessa jumps." I did try, but sleep proved elusive. My mind kept cycling through possibilities. Vanessa accepting the terms, Vanessa rejecting them, Vanessa finding some unexpected third option I hadn't anticipated. Each scenario required different responses, different preparations. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and moved to Alex's living room, curling up on his couch with a blanket and my notebook. I reviewed my confrontation with Vanessa again, analyzing her reactions, looking for clues to her likely response. The thing that troubled me most was her lack of surprise when I mentioned certain specific details: Charles's cancer diagnosis, the legacy trust, the ethics complaint against her father. Those weren't items that had been publicly reported or easily discovered. Either she had already known I was investigating those aspects, or someone had warned her about what I might know. The latter seemed more likely, which meant someone with knowledge of my investigation was communicating with Vanessa. My thoughts turned to Zoe, the colleague of Alex's who had falsely claimed connections to Charlotte at Westridge. Had she been more directly involved than merely monitoring my movements? Could she have accessed information about my research? I made a note to discuss this with Alex in the morning. For now, all we could do was wait and be prepared for whatever came at 9 a.m. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Alex was gently shaking my shoulder. "Emma, it's 7:30. I sat up, disoriented for a moment before remembering where I was and why. "Any word from Vanessa?" "Nothing yet." I made coffee. We ate a quiet breakfast, both lost in our own thoughts about the day ahead. At 8:30, we began final preparations, assuming Vanessa would likely wait until the last minute to respond, if she responded at all. "I'll take the package to Henry Mercer personally," Alex said, laying out our contingency plan. "You take Richard Westridge. We'll courier the media package simultaneously. That way, if there's any attempt to intercept one delivery, the others will still get through." I nodded, appreciating this strategic thinking. "And if she accepts the terms?" "Then we hold the packages in reserve, making it clear they'll be delivered immediately if she fails to fulfill any condition of the agreement." At 8:55, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. We both tensed as I checked the screen. "It's from Vanessa." I opened the message, reading aloud, "I've reviewed your terms and have a counter-proposal. Meet me at Charles Bellamy's residence, 10 a.m. Come alone or no deal? Address to follow." Alex shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. That's a trap." "Maybe." I reread the message. "Or maybe she wants Charles involved in the negotiation, thinking he'll support her version of events. Or maybe she wants you in a private location where she controls access and witnesses." Alex's expression was grim. "Either way, you're not going alone. If I don't, there's no deal." I considered our options. "What if you come with me but remain outside, ready to intervene if necessary? I'll keep my phone on with an open line to yours so you can hear everything." He didn't look happy about this compromise, but nodded reluctantly. "I still think it's too risky. She's backed into a corner. That makes her dangerous. It also makes her desperate, which could work in our favor." My phone buzzed again with the promised address, an elegant home in an exclusive neighborhood on the city's north side. "We should leave now to make it by 10. The drive to Charles Bellamy's residence was tense, neither of us speaking much as we strategized privately. The house itself was imposing, a stately Tudor revival set back from the road behind wrought iron gates and mature oak trees. Old money, old taste, old power. We parked half a block away, out of direct sight of the house but close enough for Alex to respond quickly if needed. I called his phone, putting mine on speaker and slipping it into my jacket pocket where it wouldn't be visible but would transmit our conversation. "Be careful," Alex said as I prepared to exit the car. "At the first sign of anything off, get out of there. I'll be right behind you." "I will." I squeezed his hand briefly, then stepped out into the cool morning air. The gates opened as I approached. Someone had been watching for me. I walked up the curved driveway, taking in details of the property. Well-maintained but not ostentatious, with gardens that suggested a gardener's regular attention. A home designed to signal steady wealth rather than flashy prosperity. Before I could ring the bell, the heavy oak door opened. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her expression composed but with tension evident in the set of her shoulders. "You're on time." She stepped back to allow me entry. "Charles is waiting in the study." I followed her through a grand foyer into a warmly furnished home that felt lived in despite its size and formality. Family photographs lined the hallway, many featuring a young woman with auburn hair who must have been Elizabeth Bellamy. The resemblance to Vanessa was indeed striking, though more in coloring and general features than in specific detail. Vanessa led me to a book-lined study where an elderly man sat in a leather wingback chair near a window. Charles Bellamy was thinner than in the photos I'd seen, his once robust frame diminished by illness, but his eyes were clear and alert as they fixed on me. "Mr. Bellamy," I said, inclining my head respectfully. "Thank you for seeing me." "Ms. Sullivan." His voice was weaker than I had expected, but steady. "Vanessa tells me you have concerns about her role in the foundation." "Among other concerns, yes." I glanced at Vanessa, who had positioned herself beside Charles's chair, one hand resting protectively on its back, though I'm surprised she characterized it that way, given our conversation yesterday. "Perhaps you should share your concerns directly," Charles suggested, gesturing to a chair opposite his, "so we can address them properly." I remained standing. "Before I do, I'd like to clarify something. Are you aware that Vanessa has been spreading false rumors about me throughout the publishing industry? That she has systematically damaged my professional reputation over the past several months?" Charles frowned, looking up at Vanessa. "Is this true?" A flash of irritation crossed her features before she composed them into a mask of concern. "Emma and I had a personal falling out, Charles. She's been struggling professionally and seems to blame me for setbacks that have other causes. It's unfortunate, but not unusual in competitive industries." "That's not true," I said calmly. "I have documented evidence of Vanessa telling specific falsehoods about me to multiple industry contacts. These weren't casual comments, but a coordinated campaign to blacklist me from positions I was qualified for." "Evidence?" Charles looked troubled. "What kind of evidence?" "Testimonials from the people she spoke to, records of the timing and content of her comments, patterns that cannot be coincidental." I turned to Vanessa. "But as I said yesterday, that's not my primary concern today. I'm more troubled by the manipulation I've uncovered regarding you and your foundation." "Manipulation?" Charles's frown deepened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Vanessa has systematically positioned herself to control your assets and the foundation's resources after your death. That she has isolated you from longtime friends and advisors who might question her influence. That she has leveraged her superficial resemblance to your daughter to create an emotional dependency that serves her interests rather than yours." Charles's expression shifted from confusion to anger. "That's a serious accusation, young woman. One I find both offensive and unfounded. Vanessa has been nothing but supportive and caring during a difficult time in my life. I understand why you feel that way, Mr. Bellamy. She's worked very hard to create that impression." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "But the evidence suggests a different reality, one where your vulnerability has been exploited for financial gain." "This is absurd," Vanessa interjected. "Charles, you don't need to listen to these baseless allegations. Ms. Sullivan clearly has personal grievances she's trying to address through these attacks." I reached into my bag and withdrew a slim folder, different from the one I had shown Vanessa yesterday, containing only selected documents relevant to this conversation. "These are not baseless allegations, Mr. Bellamy. This folder contains financial records showing how foundation resources have been redirected through entities ultimately controlled by Vanessa. It includes email correspondence between Vanessa and her father, Lawrence Hampton, discussing how to structure your estate to benefit her while maintaining legal deniability. It documents the systematic removal of board members who questioned these arrangements, including Martin Cleary, whose death came suspiciously soon after he raised concerns." Charles stared at the folder I placed on the table beside him but didn't reach for it. His expression had grown guarded, uncertain. "Charles, don't," Vanessa said quickly. "This is exactly what we discussed, an attempt to create division between us by someone who doesn't understand our relationship." "What relationship exactly?" I asked, addressing Charles directly. "One where she calls you Uncle Charles in private but presents herself as your surrogate daughter in public." One where she's arranged to control your personal fortune and the foundation's endowment after your death through trusts and legal structures created by her father? A moment of silence fell over the room, heavy with tension. Then Charles did something unexpected. He laughed. A dry, wheezing sound that contained no humor. "Ms. Sullivan," he said finally, "do you think I'm a complete fool? Do you imagine I don't know exactly what Vanessa is?" This response caught me off guard. I glanced between him and Vanessa, trying to read the situation. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. You've constructed an elaborate narrative about exploitation and manipulation, casting me as the helpless victim and Vanessa as the calculating predator." He shook his head. "The reality is considerably more complex." Vanessa's posture had changed subtly, her hand no longer protective on Charles's chair but loose at her side. Her expression was unreadable. "I'm aware of Vanessa's ambition," Charles continued. "I'm aware of her interest in my resources and the Foundation's influence. I'm also aware of her resemblance to my daughter and how she has occasionally emphasized that similarity to strengthen our connection. And that doesn't concern you?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by his apparent acceptance. "Why should it? We have an arrangement that benefits us both. I get the companionship and support of a bright, capable young woman during my final years. She gets financial security and a position of influence she covets. The terms are clear to both parties." I struggled to process this. "You're saying you knowingly entered into a transactional relationship? That you're not being deceived?" "I'm saying that at 73, with terminal cancer and no living family, I'm under no illusions about why an ambitious 30-something spends her time with me." His gaze was steady, laced with a cynicism I hadn't expected. "Vanessa has been honest about what she wants. In return, I've been honest about what I'm willing to provide. The legal structures we've created together ensure that arrangement continues after my death." I looked at Vanessa, who was watching this exchange with calculated detachment. "And the Foundation? Its mission to support emerging artists? What happens to that when control passes to Vanessa?" "The Foundation will continue its work," Charles said dismissively, perhaps with a shifted focus, but that's natural in philanthropic organizations as leadership changes. A shifted focus away from the broad support of diverse artists toward specific initiatives that enhance Vanessa's influence in the publishing industry, I clarified. "Away from the original mission that honored your daughter's memory." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Elizabeth. "My daughter has been dead for 15 years, Mrs. Sullivan. The Foundation served its purpose in helping me process that grief. Now it will serve another purpose, ensuring that someone I've chosen continues to have the resources to make an impact in the literary world she cared about." The conversation had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. I had expected to find Charles Bellamy either complicit in Vanessa's schemes or victimized by them. Instead, I was discovering a third possibility, a man who had entered into this relationship with clear-eyed awareness of its transactional nature, who had chosen to trade his resources for the companionship and attention Vanessa provided. "And Martin Cleary?" I asked. "The board member who died of a heart attack shortly after questioning these arrangements? Was that part of your clear-eyed arrangement as well? A flicker of something, discomfort? Uncertainty?" crossed Charles's features. "Martin's death was unfortunate and unexpected. He was an old friend who didn't understand the decisions I was making. We had disagreed, but that happened often over our long friendship. He filed an ethics complaint against Lawrence Hampton regarding the transfer of your personal residence to a trust controlled by Vanessa," I said. "A complaint that was withdrawn after his death by an executor connected to Lawrence's firm." Charles glanced at Vanessa, a question in his eyes. She remained impassive. "I was not aware of the specifics of that situation," he admitted. "Lawrence handled the legal matters related to the property transfer. If there were irregularities in that process, they occurred without my knowledge." A crack in the unified front. Charles might be aware of the transactional nature of his relationship with Vanessa, might even have accepted it, but he wasn't fully informed about all the actions taken to secure her position. "Mr. Bellamy," I said carefully, "I believe you when you say you entered into this arrangement with Vanessa knowingly. But I also believe there are aspects of how she and her father have implemented that arrangement that would concern you deeply if you were aware of them. Ethical lines crossed, legal boundaries pushed, perhaps even more serious transgressions, such as?" His voice had grown weaker, the conversation clearly taxing his limited energy. I hesitated, glancing at Vanessa. Her expression remained controlled, but tension radiated from her posture. She was listening intently, calculating, always calculating, such as the potentially suspicious nature of Martin Cleary's death, I said quietly, such as the use of Foundation resources for purposes that violate non-profit regulations, such as the isolation from medical professionals who might question your decision-making capacity during periods of treatment. Charles looked troubled, his certainty wavering visibly. These are serious allegations. Yes, they are. And they're supported by documentation I've gathered. I gestured to the folder beside him. I came here today not to disrupt an arrangement you entered willingly, but to ensure that arrangement hasn't been corrupted beyond your knowledge or intentions. Charles, Vanessa interjected, her voice tight with controlled emotion, this woman has a personal vendetta against me. She's twisting facts, presenting normal business decisions as sinister conspiracies. Don't let her manipulate you this way. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything, I told Charles. I'm asking you to review the evidence yourself and make your own judgment. If you find my concerns unfounded, I'll accept that. But if you discover that Vanessa and her father have been operating beyond the boundaries you established, perhaps you'll reconsider certain aspects of your arrangement. Charles stared at the folder for a long moment, then reached for it with a slightly trembling hand. Vanessa made a small, aborted movement as if to intercept, then caught herself and stepped back. I think I would like to review these materials, Charles said firmly. Alone. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Charles, you don't need to. I said alone, Vanessa. His tone was sharper than I had heard him use before. Please show Miss Sullivan to the sitting room while I look through this folder. We'll continue our conversation afterward. For a moment, I thought Vanessa might refuse. Then she nodded stiffly and gestured for me to follow her. As we left the study, I glanced back to see Charles opening the folder, his expression grave. The sitting room was formal and rarely used, lacking the personal touches evident in other parts of the house. Vanessa closed the door behind us, then turned to face me, all pretense of politeness gone. You've made a serious miscalculation, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Whatever you think you're accomplishing here, it won't work. Charles and I understand each other perfectly. He won't be swayed by selective evidence and misrepresented communications. If that's true, then you have nothing to worry about, I replied calmly. He'll review the materials and dismiss them as irrelevant to your arrangement. And then what? You'll accept his judgment and walk away? Her tone was skeptical, bordering on contemptuous. That depends on what he decides after reviewing the evidence. If he genuinely believes everything that's happened is within the boundaries of your agreement, I'll focus my concerns on your campaign against me personally. She paced the room, her calm facade crumbling further. This isn't going to end the way you think, Emma. You have no idea what you're interfering with or the consequences of your actions. I think I do, actually. I think I'm interfering with a carefully constructed plan to control Charles Bellamy's fortune and foundation. I think I'm exposing methods that crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries. And I think the consequences will be appropriate accountability for actions that have harmed multiple people, myself included. Vanessa stopped pacing and faced me directly. You really believe you're the hero of this story, don't you? The righteous crusader exposing corruption and seeking justice. She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor. Has it occurred to you that maybe there are no heroes here? That maybe we're all just people pursuing our interests as best we can in an indifferent world? There's a difference between pursuing your interests and deliberately destroying others to advance yourself, I countered. Between making mutually beneficial arrangements and manipulating vulnerable people through deception. Those distinctions matter, Vanessa. They're what separate ambition from predation. She studied me with something almost like curiosity. You actually mean that? After everything you've discovered about how the world really works, how success is built on connections and influence rather than merit, how wealth protects itself through structures designed to appear legitimate, you still believe in these moral distinctions. I do, and in that moment I realized it was true. Despite everything I had learned, everything I had seen of the darker aspects of human nature through this investigation, I still believed in the fundamental importance of ethical boundaries. Those distinctions are what make civilization possible. Without them, we're just sophisticated predators in expensive clothes. Before Vanessa could respond, the door opened. Charles stood there, looking older and more tired than he had in the study, the folder clutched in his hand. Vanessa, he said quietly, I'd like to speak with Ms. Sullivan privately now. The flash of alarm in her eyes was unmistakable. Charles, I don't think that's wise in your condition. Perhaps we should continue this conversation another time, when you're feeling stronger. My condition makes time a luxury I can't afford, he replied firmly. Please wait in the study. I'll join you shortly. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse. Then she nodded sharply and left, her posture rigid with contained tension. Charles closed the door behind her and moved slowly to a chair, lowering himself with the careful movements of someone managing constant pain. Sit, please. He gestured to a chair opposite his. I sat, waiting for him to speak first. I've reviewed your materials, he said finally. They are troubling, particularly the communications between Vanessa and her father regarding Martin's concerns and the subsequent ethics complaint. He sighed heavily. I was aware of the arrangement's transactional nature, as I said earlier. What I was not aware of was the extent to which certain lines may have been crossed to secure it. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I know this must be difficult to process, more disappointing than difficult. He placed the folder carefully on the table between us. I'm not a sentimental man, Miss Sullivan. I entered into this arrangement with Vanessa with clear expectations about its nature. I accepted her interest in my resources as the price of her companionship and support. What I cannot accept is deception about the methods used to secure those resources. What will you do now? I asked. Adjust the terms of our arrangement. His voice was steady despite his evident fatigue. Certain aspects of the Foundation's governance will need to be reconsidered. The Legacy Trust will require modifications to ensure proper oversight. And Vanessa will need to understand that transparency, even about uncomfortable truths, is non-negotiable going forward. Not the complete reversal I had expected, but a significant recalibration nonetheless. And the rumors she spread about me? The damage to my career? Charles frowned. That behavior is separate from our arrangement and reflects poorly on her character. I will insist that she make appropriate amends, including public retractions of any false statements. Thank you. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling me since I discovered the full scope of Vanessa's activities. Mr. Bellamy, may I ask something personal? Something about your daughter? A shadow crossed his face, but he nodded. Do you think Elizabeth would approve of how the Foundation created in her memory has evolved? Of the direction Vanessa intends to take it? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implications about legacy, memory, and how we honor those we've lost. Charles was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to a photograph on the mantel, Elizabeth in cap and gown at her college graduation, radiant with possibility and promise. My daughter was idealistic, he said finally, passionate about creating opportunities for voices that might otherwise go unheard. She believed in merit over connections, in art that challenged rather than comforted. He smiled faintly, the expression tinged with old grief. No, I don't think she would approve of what the Foundation has become, or of my role in allowing that transformation. It's not too late to realign it with her values, I suggested gently. Perhaps not entirely too late. He looked back at me, his gaze sharpening. Why did you pursue this, Missy Sullivan? Beyond the personal harm Vanessa caused you, what motivated this investigation? It was my turn to consider carefully before answering. Initially, it was about understanding what had happened to me and why. Then it became about justice, not just for myself, but for others she had harmed in similar ways. And ultimately, I paused, finding the truth as I spoke it. Ultimately, it was about asserting that truth matters, that actions have consequences, that we can't simply accept manipulation and exploitation as the way the world works. Charles nodded slowly. Idealistic like Elizabeth, he sighed. I need to speak with Vanessa now. Our arrangement will continue, but with significant modifications reflecting what I've learned today. And she will address the damage she's caused to your reputation. I'll make that a condition of our continued relationship. Thank you. I stood, recognizing that the conversation was concluding. For listening, for taking these concerns seriously. Thank you for your courage in bringing them forward. He remained seated, clearly conserving his limited energy. Vanessa will show you out after I've spoken with her. I left him there, surrounded by photographs of the daughter he had lost and books they had once discussed together. Whatever his flaws, whatever compromises he had made in his grief and loneliness, there was still a fundamental decency in his willingness to reconsider in the face of new information. The study door was closed when I reached the hallway. I waited, uncertain whether to knock or simply leave. Before I could decide, the door opened and Vanessa emerged, her expression tightly controlled but her eyes burning with suppressed emotion. Charles would like me to show you out, she said, each word precise and clipped. We walked in silence to the front door. On the threshold, she finally spoke again. This isn't over, you know. You've won this round, but there will be others. It doesn't have to be about winning or losing, Vanessa. I met her gaze directly. It could be about making amends and moving forward more ethically. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Still so naive. Still believing in redemption arcs and moral growth. She shook her head. Some people don't change, Emma. They just adapt their strategies. Then I'll be watching for those adaptations. I replied calmly. Charles expects you to address the rumors you've spread about me. I expect a complete and verifiable retraction to every person you influenced by the end of this week. Or what? The challenge was immediate, instinctive. Or the rest of the evidence goes to the authorities and the media as originally planned. Charles may be willing to continue your arrangement with modifications, but that goodwill is contingent on your complete compliance with his conditions, including making amends to me. She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. Then she nodded once, a sharp, reluctant acknowledgement. I'll make the retractions. Not because you demand it, but because Charles does. The motivation matters less than the action. I stepped outside into the late morning sunlight. Goodbye, Vanessa. I sincerely hope our paths don't cross again. As I walked down the driveway, I heard the door close firmly behind me. Not slammed in anger, but shut with definitive finality. A chapter ending, if not quite the way I had anticipated. Alex was waiting anxiously in the car, relief washing over his features as he spotted me approaching. You're okay, he said as I slid into the passenger seat. I was getting worried. That went longer than expected. I'm fine. I found myself smiling, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar after weeks of tension and focus. Better than fine, actually. What happened in there? I could hear parts of the conversation, but it cut out when you moved to different rooms. I described the unexpected turn the confrontation had taken, Charles's awareness of the transactional nature of his relationship with Vanessa, his reconsideration after reviewing the evidence, the compromise solution that would allow the arrangement to continue, but with significant modifications. So it worked, Alex said when I had finished. Not exactly as planned, but you achieved what you set out to do. Vanessa will be held accountable, your reputation will be restored, and the foundation will be protected from the worst of her influence. Yes. I gazed out the window as we drove away from Charles Bellamy's estate, watching it recede in the side mirror. It worked, though the victory feels different than I expected. Less triumphant, more complicated. Because Charles wasn't just a victim, because he knowingly participated in parts of the arrangement. Partly that. And partly because I realized something important during that final conversation with Vanessa. I turned to look at Alex. She genuinely doesn't understand why what she did was wrong. To her, it's all just strategy and tactics, winners and losers. The idea that there might be ethical boundaries beyond what's legally enforceable is foreign to her. And that's sad, limiting. Alex nodded thoughtfully. So what now? Back to job hunting and normal life? Soon. I smiled again, feeling the weight of the past weeks beginning to lift. But first, I think I need some time to process everything that's happened, to figure out what lessons I want to take from this experience and what parts I want to leave behind. That sounds healthy. He reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. Whatever you decide, I'm here. You know that, right? I do. And in that moment, despite everything I had learned about betrayal and manipulation, I found I still believed in friendship, in loyalty, in the possibility of genuine connection. Vanessa hadn't destroyed that capacity in me, though she had certainly tested it. As we drove back toward the city, I felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle realignment. The obsessive focus on revenge that had consumed me was dissipating, replaced by a clearer sense of perspective. Vanessa would face consequences for her actions. My reputation would be rehabilitated. The foundation would be protected from the worst of her influence. Justice, in its imperfect human way, had been served. And I had emerged from the ordeal not unscathed, certainly, but also not fundamentally broken. Changed, yes. More cautious, perhaps. More aware of the darkness that can hide behind friendly faces. But also more appreciative of the genuine connections that had sustained me. More certain of my own resilience. More committed to the ethical boundaries that Vanessa had so casually dismissed. Where to? Alex asked as we approached the city limits. I considered for a moment, then smiled. Home. I'm ready to go home. Not to put the experience behind me entirely. That would be impossible and unwise. but to integrate it into a life that would continue, evolve, and eventually thrive again. A life defined not by what Vanessa had done to me, but by how I had responded to it. By the strength I had discovered, the clarity I had gained, and the values I had ultimately affirmed. She had spread rumors to ruin my life. I had exposed her darkest secrets to everyone who mattered. But in the end, the most important victory wasn't her downfall. It was my refusal to become like her in the process of securing justice. That was the revenge that mattered most, living well, living ethically, in a world where such choices are neither easy nor always rewarded, but remain essential to who we choose to be.